Welcome to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid. A set of conversations about our government, our politics, and the kind of country we aspire to be. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath, on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Well, happy August, everybody. We are, heading towards the end of the summer. We're heading towards a very consequential fall. It's rainy and, people at Lollapalooza in Chicago are splashing around, listening to the music. But I want to talk to you about memory. Memory. From now until the midterms, we are going to be force-fed a diet of lies, distortions, abrupt changes of subject, fake videos, fake outrage, and it'll all be topped with pleas for us to distrust and fear each other. Its purpose is to make us forget. It's to make us forget. And we've already seen the effects. Now, look, conventional wisdom and a lot of pundits, they're going to tell you that the propaganda is to make us forget that Donald Trump and his Republicans have plundered everything they can get their hands on, and while making America less free, less prosperous, less safe, far less respected in the world. That's not right, because if that's the intent, it's already failed. I mean, Americans know, look at the polls, talk to your friends. Americans know that Trump and his cronies are corrupt. We know that things are going badly in Iran. We know that prices are up. We know we're on the wrong track. But we should still be very worried. Why? Why? Well, look, I don't know if you saw The Odyssey yet. And Christopher Nolan's version of The Odyssey skips entirely the land of the lotus eaters. And that's too bad, because it helps explain what Trump's propaganda machine is really doing. And for fun, let me just read you from Emily Wilson's absolutely fine translation. Here's what Odysseus says about the lotus eaters. The scouts encountered humans, lotus eaters, who did not hurt them. They just shared with them their delicious sweet fruit. But as they ate it, they lost the will to come back and bring news to me. They wanted only to stay there, feeding on the lotus with the lotus eater. They had forgotten home. They'd forgotten home. And there it is. The aim of all these lies that we're fed isn't, to forget that Trump's a crook. No, that's not the point. The reason we're getting all this nonsense is to get amnesia about who we are, what our country is, what our historic striving has been about. Because if we forget this, we are lost forever. That's why there's signs now in front of the Smithsonian warning visitors that the exhibits are unfaithful to our history. Because if we learn that Black Americans overcame almost unimaginable cruelty and challenges and taught the whole nation about the true meaning of the Declaration of Independence, well, you know what? We might stand up for our own freedom. Trump and his cronies, they'll spend billions to make us forget ourselves. Their lies are amplified in taxpayer-funded government websites, in social media, in captured news organizations. I mean, this week we learned Elon Musk is returning to politics and planning to spend big to protect the president's majority. His cash adds to an already huge resource advantage the GOP brings to the midterms for lies. And we learned that Mark Zuckerberg is training Meta's AI on right-wing propaganda. So between Grok and Meta, soon, if you ask the internet any question, you're going to get a right-wing answer. That's what these people are doing. Why? So we'll forget who we are. And the pace of incoming information is meant to numb us. We will hear the Strait of Hormuz is open and Iran will never develop anything nuclear. Days later, or maybe later the same day, we'll hear that our intrepid commander-in-chief is bombing them back to the Stone Age because, well, never mind the because. The important thing is that he's a man of action who is doing what no one else has the courage to do. And maybe many will forget that here it's actually the people who are sovereign. Right? Those who remember an America whose defense secretary doesn't think testosterone is a military strategy will have their thoughts interrupted by outrageous claims that Dr. Fauci is a killer. Those who actually recall a Justice Department that doesn't fabricate evidence to get grand jury indictments of political foes, they'll be confronted by video of new and urgent and huge migrant surges at our border. And if they recognize that border is actually Quetta, a Spanish outpost in North Africa, they will be told, never mind that, our great president has just got Hamas to lay down his arms. Right? It's all lies to just stop us remembering us. Anyone who does remember who we are, who resists that forgetting, is going to be called a communist. Right? The president is already saying the Democrats are communists, sorry. If you're listening to this show, then you're likely to be called a communist. Fox and CBS, they'll repeat the president's charges. Everyone in the country is going to be fed the story for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you know what? It's scary being attacked by the president, and it's scary to think there are communists everywhere. But on cue, we will be told not to worry because the president has directed our national security apparatus to root out those domestic threats. And we'll be told how hard he is working to protect us. By the next morning, I bet you won't even remember being a communist. Never mind that you never were. And in the midst of all that, who will remember that we are not a nation that turns its national security apparatus on its own citizens? I mean, if they make us angry enough at each other, cue stories about Gaza or trans rights or lawless borders, maybe we will forget that our futures actually depend on one another. We will forget that this is a great democracy. Forget the rule of law. Forget that most of us are fundamentally decent. Forget that diversity has been a feature of our nation from its inception. And forget that individuals have agency and can make a difference. And forget, most importantly, that when we work together, there is nothing we cannot accomplish, including throwing out a corrupt and destructive government. Yeah. So it's Homeric wisdom that helps us see what this right-wing propaganda really is. The land of the lotus eaters, it was among the first, the very first of Odysseus's encounters on his long trip home. But to get home required determination, courage, creativity, some dissembling, and in the end, some friends. But even to begin the journey, Homer makes clear, we must not forget who we are. All right, I have a great show for you today. And the first stop is Ukraine. It's an interview that I recorded, a day ago, where we thought maybe Donald Trump was going to let the Ukrainians build Patriot missiles in Ukraine. But of course, today he has scuttled that. But still a great interview. That's where we'll start. And we will head from there to a great show. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, I have a treat for you. Tamara Jacoby is back. She is, of course, the Kiev-based director of the Progressive Policy Institute's New Ukraine Project. She came to that after a distinguished career as a journalist, and she has been helping us understand that part of the world since this conflict began. I think you and I have been talking for a while. And this conflict began what feels like a lifetime ago. I mean, I remember when George Bush and Bill Clinton came here to Chicago quietly at the beginning to lay a wreath at the fabulous Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It's just a couple blocks from where I am. And you know what? The world has changed a lot since then.
Well, it has been going on for a long time. I mean, it went on quietly and almost unnoticed from 2014 until 2022,
Right.
when the Russians, escalated it big time. It was a kind of a small, war over in the corner of Ukraine. I mean, people died and land was taken, blood was shed. It was not a nice picture, but the world largely ignored it. And then in 2022, what the Ukrainians call full-scale invasion happened.
Right.
And that's been going on almost 5 years now. We're 4.5 years.
Which is 4 years longer than the world expected it to go on.
And it's a long time for a war. I maybe forgive me if I've told you this joke, but the joke about the Russians is in the 4 years that they fought World War II, they went from Moscow to Berlin. In the 4 years 4.5 years they've been fighting in Ukraine, they went from Donbass to Donbass.
Right.
Literally about 60 kilometers. I mean, many people again have died. It's been awful, but they haven't made any progress.
During World War II, warfare changed. The tactics at the beginning of the war were a different world from we've dropped two nuclear bombs, and war is a completely different thing. Um,
But
the,
so too with this war,
so
but so
too
too
with
with this
this war,
war.
right?
I
I
mean,
mean,
World War I too, right? Wars change things. Technology ramps up and the wars
yep,
change things.
yep.
I mean, I
So
can characterize the change.
talk about that. I mean, you had to live through a ballistic missile attack.
We all live through ballistic missile attacks regularly, but so that in the
Well,
old days,
we all don't. They actually
no,
kill
well, I
people.
mean, we all in Ukraine,
Right.
fair enough. So, I mean, the main thing is that in the old days, old days, like the turn of the century, until the turn of the century, until this war, really, two armies met each other on what was called a line of contact. And they met in various forms. Maybe there was some little bit of land between two trench lines. Maybe they
Right.
were hand to hand, whatever. Maybe it was tanks clashing, but they met on a line of contact, and it was on a map. You could see a line. So because of drones now, which cover every part of the battlefield and fulfill many functions. Saying drone is a little bit like saying gun. There are many different kinds of drones now that do many different kinds of things. That line has expanded to be about 20 miles of sort of no man's land. And that changes a lot of things. There's a lot, you can't really use tanks anymore more in the same way that you could. You can still use artillery. Artillery is still a very useful weapon, but close up, and you can still do some kind of sniper fire, but you can't go out into the open where the other side can see you, or you're instantly basically killed. And so it's changed the front, so to speak, quite a lot. It's also changed, as you point out, referencing my life, civilian life in cities, because now somewhat bigger drones and missile bombardments of cities are the big thing. And that was true, of course, in World War II, in the Blitz, and the Nazis had what they called V1 and V2 missiles. V1 were cruise, V2 were ballistic. But it's true in a much bigger way now. I mean, I think last night alone, Russia rained 30 different, or maybe it was 70. I'm sorry, I'm going to forget the numbers. That happens all the time. Missiles down on Ukraine, killing, half a dozen people. Happens all the time. In my apartment building, there's frequently ballistic missiles outside. And just to clarify what's a ballistic missile that's so dangerous, they fly in a parabola. So when they come down, they're coming down at about 6 times the speed of sound. And it's very fast and it's very hard to shoot them down. And you die if you're in the way.
I am a reader of novels, and um, I really, it's a book that no one will read because it's weird. But
Gabby's
Gabby's
Rainbow.
Rainbow is one of my
Right.
favorites, right? And A Screaming Comes Through the Night. Um,
Right.
it's about the V2 and this experience that you've had. But I'm stunned that 30 ballistic missiles kill 6 people. That is that seems
Well,
very inefficient warfare.
well, they don't use, they don't use them. They don't. So I might have last night's numbers wrong. So don't hold me to account on that.
Okay.
But and people do die. They don't generally aim them at. I mean, they do sometimes aim them at civilian apartment buildings, but it's often that something else gets destroyed. I mean, I moved recently in Kyiv because my supermarket was hit by a ballistic missile, and it
Mm.
was hit in the middle of the night, and so there was nobody in it. A three-story supermarket turned into a jack-o'-lantern. I mean, literally an inferno. So no one was actually killed, but it was a few blocks away from me. I just had to
That's
move to
that's not
a safer
enough.
neighborhood. So sometimes they are aimed they're often aimed at energy infrastructure and that sort of
Hmm.
thing, and they often miss. I mean, I've had, in this same apartment building that I've moved away from, we were near this sort of targeted area. And so they were often ballistic missiles that landed a few hundred yards away, that were basically, sort of misses of a target that was another few hundred yards away in a different direction. So yes, a lot of
So
money
this
made,
is
a lot of money
this
wasted.
constant, phenomenally costly, both on offense and defense, ballistic missile war going on. But there is something else in this space, this no man's land that you talked about. John Ratcliffe, who is the head of the CIA here, he gave a talk earlier this month, and he said the average life expectancy of a Russian recruit now
I
arriving on
saw
the
that.
battlefield in Ukraine is between 20 and 30 minutes.
Well, the
I
Russians
mean,
use the troops as complete cattle fodder. The Ukrainians are much more careful. They have fewer
yeah,
people and they respect life.
it's 8-1, I think, the ratio now.
Yeah. So the Russians just, they send guys into this kill zone. And if you're spotted in a kill zone, you're dead. I mean, that's what when I go to the front, that's what the soldiers tell me. If we see a living thing, we can kill it, guarantee. So, but the Russians send guys into this kill zone on the hope that you send, eight, maybe one will get through, and he'll sort of hunker down in a building somewhere. And then the next day or the afternoon, you'll send another eight, and maybe two will get through, and he'll hunker down in the same building. And before you know it, you have three, five guys in that building. So that they're just, they're throwing literally meat at the guns,
Well, I don't
at
think
the troops.
Americans understand um, the size of this war and the casualties. I mean, as I understand it, there are 2 million casualties already. You
Well, the
know,
Russian side, neither of them talk about the casualties, right? So
yeah,
again, we're down to intelligence estimates. But the Ukrainian estimate of Russian casualties is 1.4 million at this point, and that
right,
includes dead and wounded. And the
right.
ratio of dead to wounded is much higher than it is in many wars on the Russian side because
Yeah,
they have such little regard for life. The Ukrainian side, the numbers are less publicized, but I think you're right. I think altogether we're up to about 2 million. I think
but
on the
just
Ukrainian side, it's more injuries than deaths,
yeah,
but
yeah,
plenty of
yeah.
people dead.
But for context for Americans who have paid attention to Gaza,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
2 million is the total population of Gaza.
right,
Right? The total population of Gaza.
right.
And that's the number of people who we think are casualties so far in this war.
Well,
It's
and
just
Vietnam, like, what is it?
enormous.
67,000 Americans were killed in Vietnam. Isn't that the number? Something like that?
Something like that.
67,000 compared to
Mhm.
2 million. I mean, not 2 million dead, but I mean, the numbers are staggering. The
Staggering.
numbers are
And,
staggering.
and it sounds like the Russians have not adapted to modern warfare, just as the Russians haven't adapted to a post-industrial economy in the same kind of alacrity as others have.
Yeah, well, I mean, they do some things well. I mean, the two sides copy each other. So again, the best soldier's metaphor for it that I've heard is it's like a mirror. One of us does it first, and then the other one figures out how to do it.
Yeah,
And it's often the Ukrainians are ahead, but in some things the Russians have been ahead. And what the Russians' advantage is once they do it, they scale it much faster. They have big
yeah.
industrial machine. In Ukraine, they're kind of making things. They have some arms factories, but they're making a lot of things in garages, and so the Russians can scale it faster, and they do some often. So it has been and will continue to be a kind of a very close race where the race is to be smarter about the technology and to get there faster and be more innovative and to use what you've got smarter. But you are in constant competition with the enemy, with other units, and with what you did yesterday. So there's a lot of pressure to do better all the time. And so the Russians aren't, I mean, you're right, they don't have, their AI is very poor. They rely on China now for a lot of the components for their weaponry. They rely on Iran for stuff, but we're not, they're not fighting with slingshots or hunting rifles. I mean, they have a lot of stuff, and they have a lot of these ballistic missiles, unfortunately, that only, I mean, we haven't used the word, only American Patriot systems, they're called, can shoot down a ballistic missile, and nobody has enough. We sent 600, I think, to Ukraine since in the last 5 years. I think we've used up 1,500 in Iran. Um, and we hardly have any left. Like Like one of the reasons Trump's trying to make peace in Iran is because we don't have any patriots left. So big problem. Russians have a lot of ballistic missiles. We don't
Well,
have
just
enough
so we're
patriots.
clear, everybody, the we in that sentence is not Ukraine. The we in that sentence is the
It's the
United States.
West.
Yeah, the West, right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Sorry. I've got my pronouns all mixed up.
Yes, we've been profligate with our use of this stuff. So these are expensive, and Donald
Four
Trump
million bucks.
went to a NATO meeting and said, "I want Greenland, and you guys are terrible, and Spain, you're the worst of the worst." By the way, I'm going to stand on the stage and take credit for your World Cup victory. But Europe said, "Yeah, we don't care about any of that. Say what you want. We don't believe you. Let Ukraine build Patriot missiles." And I think he said, "Okay," didn't he?
He said, okay, but they're very hard to build. They take a couple of years. And Ukraine is very able, a lot of engineers and, good at stuff, but they're not going to shorten 2 years into 2 weeks.
No.
And, and, even getting the deal is going to be complicated. Like the president said it without consulting the company. Now the company has said in a general way, yes. In normal peacetime, it could take 5 years to just get the deal.
Yeah.
So we're not going to have enough Patriot. I mean, Ukraine is not going to be making a lot of Patriot missiles, in 2026. And I don't know if
Mhm.
they'll make many in 2027. And I don't like, it's very bad in my neighborhood. That's not good news.
No,
Sorry, it's not funny, but
but it's also, I
um,
mean, ballistic missiles aren't as expensive, but they're still expensive.
oh, they're hugely
It-
expensive.
And
It's
so
awful.
Russia must have some constraints on their side now.
They make a lot of them. That no, I
Yeah.
haven't heard too much about that. I
Yeah.
mean, they have a lot of them stockpiled. The good news, and we haven't mentioned this yet, is that Ukraine's been using its long range cruise missiles and its long range drones to smash the heck out of the Russian oil industry, basically. And that means storage tanks, but even more importantly, refineries. And literally in the last 2, 3 months, they've knocked out more than a third of Russian oil refining capacity. So that all over Russia, people are waiting in line not an hour, but like 24 hours, 48 hours for gas, and gas is rationed and gas is super expensive, and that cuts into Russian the money Russia has to wage the war because oil is their main commodity, is the staple of their industry. So Ukraine's having a good few months. Like it's a good moment.
Well,
Um,
I mean, this is also a big change. When Joe Biden, uh, his response was to show up there in person, to say, "I'm 100% with you," and to say, "But I'm only going to give you weapons to defend yourself. You are not going to use them in Russia." And so he was personally courageous and politically timid. And that turned out to be true more generally. But here, uh, it limited Ukraine early on. Those limits seem to be gone.
and this is the big change that has nothing to do with technology. That really is the important thing for your listeners to remember. Ukraine has gone from being this poor little country that we all sort of feel morally empathetic with, and we sort of give them some favors to help them, to being a real military powerhouse that now should be a partner. We should look at them as a partner in supplying technology and war know-how and war experience. And that's true for the US, mighty machine that we have, because we don't have that drone capability. It's true for Europe in spades. Ukraine has built itself from, a little 90-pound weakling, to use the metaphor, to a
Mhm.
huge, brawny military power. And the biggest army in Europe, most experienced army in Europe, biggest defense industry in Europe, national defense industry, making all this innovative stuff. It wasn't an accident that in the Iran war, the countries being shelled by Iran looked to Ukraine for help. So big change from being the poor pitiable sort of victim that we helped, to being strong, should be seen as a partner.
Okay. Well, I was hoping you
And
would talk
the
about that
Ukrainians are
because
proud of that.
so in wartime, a nation that everybody said will last a week, 4 years later, they have not only lasted a week, but they've become a very important military power on the planet that
Right.
is able to help the United States in its folly in Iran, and help other nations in Europe. even as it gets help. Um, all
I mean,
that
it's all a
said,
little, yeah.
um, well, no, go ahead, because I'm going to take
Well,
this.
it's all a little troubling in its way, right? In the sense that, it's like Chekhov's gun. Like you show me a gun in the first act, and means it's gonna shoot somebody by the end of the act. And it's troubling that there's so much war going on in the world, and so many countries are feeling a need to arm and rearm and whatever. I mean, despite being in the middle of it and taking some pleasure in Ukraine's prowess, it's in some ways it horrifies me. I mean, and I'm not a pacifist. I think you have to fight back against bad guys. And this is about really fighting back against bad guys, a particular bad guy in my neighborhood or the Ukrainian neighborhood. But but it is, it's not. I can't pretend I say this with ease. Oh, the world is turning or spending half their budgets on defense, and great that Ukraine is the defense partner. I mean, it is great, but it's also
Sure.
absurd historically.
When you
Bad
when you
things
move
happen
there,
when after.
when you move there to help Ukraine make a transition from a post-Soviet culture, post-Soviet economy to a uh, uh, much more contemporary, liberal in the traditional sense of that word, democracy. You would have said we need to build an economy, but you wouldn't have said we need to build it based on building weapons. You would have said a civilian economy
Absolutely,
is more
absolutely.
durable and right. But here's
Right.
where we are.
But here's where we
Um,
are.
right. All right. So because of that success they have had, because they've had uh, success in building a military capacity, in defending the country, in bringing the war to Russia, the top two people got fired in the military. That that's how
Yeah.
could you explain that? What happened to
Yeah.
us?
Well, okay, so this goes to the question that you just posed. I mean, you said I went there to help the transition to a more liberal democracy and politics. I wouldn't say I went there to help. I would say I went to chronicle that transition.
Okay,
But
fair.
I'm not, I'm only a journalist, right? Let's not inflate my role. But the point is that Ukraine broke away from the Soviet Union in 1991, but it didn't really break away. It sort of existed in the shadow of Russia for several decades, where it maintained lots of the old ways, not a free market by any means, not really a democracy by any means, horribly corrupt in all aspects,
In
a lot
every
of bad
means, yeah.
things. And
Mhm.
and I mean, it's useful to think about some of those countries that did it differently. Estonia, right up in the north, like on the Baltic Sea. I once asked an Estonian, "Are you and Ukrainians? Do you think of them as your post-Soviet brothers?" And he said, "No, no, no, that's the wrong metaphor. We were prisoners in the same prison, meaning the Soviet Union. They were both
Mhm.
occupied by the Soviet Union. But when the prison gates opened, we ran out." The Ukrainians weren't sure whether they were going to go out, and they stayed and had lunch with the guards. And that's what Ukraine did for a long time. And so there was a lot of and then about 10 years ago, a younger generation actually came into the streets. 1 million people demonstrated in the streets and said, "We really want to break away now. We've had enough of this. We don't like this sort of post-Soviet Russian in the Russia's shadow life." And so since then, and since I've been there, certainly there's been a younger generation of reformers and people who really want to bring the country again, economically, politically, in all way, technologically, in all ways you can think of, into the modern world, into the West, and an old guard that kind of liked it the old way, that's making money off the old way and being powerful on the old way. And what you're seeing in the military is it's a little oversimplified. There are a lot of things that go into it, but a kind of a manifestation of that conflict. This young guy, Fedorov, really comes out of that who was the defense minister until 2 weeks ago, comes out of that younger generation of reformers, super focused on technology, digitizing the country, drones, free market. He was the one who said, "We're not going to produce drones the old way in a big Soviet-like factory. We're going to let a kind of Silicon Valley economy prevail." And he's done a lot of amazing things. The data system that they used to monitor the war and control the war surpasses anything the West has. His creation. It's called Delta. So he's like that. And the other guy, Sierski, was an old Soviet-trained, old-style soldier. And the two cultures just clashed in the biggest way. And Zelensky, in the beginning, he didn't really know what to do, and he held on to the older guy because he trusted him, and that guy's sort of been with him, and knows where a lot of the bodies are buried. Metaphor, no pun intended. And so he sort of
And he's been
opted.
successful.
Well, he was successful, yes, but I mean, not, it's the army needs a mix,
They were
right? It
both
needs something.
successful.
They were both successful, but they couldn't get along, and Zelensky didn't know how to referee it or handle the transition well. And what was astonishing was that again, thousands of people came when he fired the young guy Fedorov. Thousands of people came into the street and demonstrated, and you can say that's not a good substitute for voting and elections and whatever, but they can't really. It's not really, wouldn't make sense to have elections now. Nobody thinks they should. And democracy worked because Zelensky backed down. He heard the protests and he fired the old general. I mean, he's not that old, but old style general. And it's not the situation's not completely resolved yet. But I mean, I think one has to take it as a good sign in the sense that it's a flexible, democratic, responsive system, and the younger generation sort of made its point. The young reformer, technology-minded generation made its point, and finally the president listened. That's a lot better than what goes on in Russia. Putin, like you can't demonstrate, to get the potholes on your street built.
Right.
Here they demonstrated about something really important, and they won.
During war about their military leadership. How do the people who are sent to fight feel about these changes?
They're happy. They liked Fedorov a lot, and they didn't like Sierski. Sierski sort of had a reputation. I mean, obviously it's mixed. Everybody doesn't have the same thing, think the same thing. But Fedorov had a reputation. His nickname was the Butcher because he was old style. It was artillery. It was infantry. It was used in the military, and a lot of people did. People have died. And I mean, again, it's not a clear all or nothing, like it can only be drones. You can't have artillery and manpower. You need the artillery and manpower too. But people really like Fedorov. Fedorov is, I mean, I dare say, this position's Fedorov. Fedorov could be the next president. There
Is he
isn't a
coming
lot.
back
The political
now?
system is.
He was
Well, he
fired.
didn't get it. Zelensky offered him. He was fired as defense minister, and Zelensky offered him a lot of other jobs, and he said, "I don't want anything but defense minister." He sort of held his ground. I mean, Zelensky made him a kind of presidential candidate in a way. I mean, there is no presidential election now, and I'm sure, then the elections are probably a long way off, and who knows what will happen in the meantime. But Zelensky Fedorov was always beloved and a kind of hero, but Zelensky elevated him quite a lot by firing him and by having these demonstrations. And and he's a very able guy, so we'll see. So he doesn't have a job now. Who knows what.
Talk about this their transition to democracy, but there are no elections, and people are okay with that. That's as I mean, we had elections during our Civil War, and it mattered. If Abraham Lincoln lost, the war would have gone differently. But we held those elections.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. I mean, the challenges in Ukraine are the following, and I mean, I'm just telling you what other people think. I sort of buy it, but I could be wrong. That there are 5 million people out in Europe, so it would be hard to arrange for them to vote. There are 1 million people plus serving in the military. It would be really hard to arrange for them to vote. If you had long lines, people at voting stations, the Russians would bomb them. There's sort of lots of reasons why they're hesitant to do it.
Yep.
Now, again, maybe they're wrong, but the thing is about Ukrainian democracy. I mean, Ukrainian democracy has always, even when there was no Ukraine, been sort of, it hasn't been channeled through what you would call a political structure. There aren't political parties. There hasn't even in the past been an ideal democratic process. People go into the street. I mean, it's really what they do. They go into the street. They've been doing that for decades. And that's sort of how they express themselves. Now they have to evolve beyond that. That is not good enough for a full modern democracy. But, for now, it's kind of working. So it's better than an autocracy. And I mean, it's going to be one of the big challenges. Because I mean, there are no political parties to speak of. That's the thing that really concerns me. And there's no There no like Zelensky didn't really get elected on ideology. He got elected on kind of a cult of personality and promise of change. And you could say that happens in a lot of countries now. That's where you could say that's what happens in most countries now. But I like it when parties stand for something and people sort of know what they're doing, and parties, work to have a good system so that they can bring people up from the bottom. And, the system of being run by a new crazy outsider every 4 years or every 5 years, however often it is, that doesn't strike, which is where most countries are going. That doesn't strike me as the ideal system.
No,
I'd like to
it's
see
not
Ukraine
stable.
develop
It's
I'd
not
like to
stable.
see Ukraine develop some parties and some, views of some other political, they're not, I mean, like an issue like, which to me, I haven't thought about this in a while because I've gotten sort of sidetracked by the defense stuff, but to me, the biggest issue in a way, between the parties in America or most democracies is how much should be government and how much should be market. And what should the mix be? What's regulated capitalism, what's regulated market economy? And different, once upon a time, Democrats and Republicans had distinctly different views of that sort of made that were coherent and that could sort of battle each other and that could
It's not the world
compromise
we're
to
in
get
now.
to a solution.
Yeah.
And we're not the world we're in now, but it was once. But in Ukraine,
Mhm.
nobody even has hardly like people don't have elaborate views about the market and the regulation. It's like it's not even sort of an issue. And you could say other things, other there. I mean, again, we're no model now, and no European country is a model now. But once upon a time, there was, America had a model that I think sort of worked. Not for everybody, not perfectly, not whatever. But I think that's an important issue that has to get worked out. I mean, it's sort of a personal, it's an anecdote, a sideline in a way, tangent. But I just did real estate deals in 4 countries, and it worked a lot better in America because we have a very effectively regulated market where the regulations work, but the market forces also work. And it didn't work so well in any of the other 3 countries
That's
because they
interesting.
don't. And
Yep.
I don't have to name them or tell you the
Yep.
stories, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but
That's interesting. Well. So
um,
in part then, the way Zelensky handled the military leadership, because you don't have elections, because there isn't really a functioning democracy, there's an aspiration for a democracy. He was responsive to the measures that there are about public sentiment, and I guess that happens all over the world in places that aren't democracies too, to more or less extent. Didn't happen in China with Tiananmen Square, but to more or less extent, it happens around the world. I think it's essential for the defense of Ukraine for a president, when there isn't a transition mechanism, to maintain the legitimacy of his position. So I think he has no choice but to pay a lot of attention to public sentiment.
yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's right. And he's not beloved in the country the way he is sort of, or was for a while, beloved in the West. I mean, there was a time in the West, it's no, Trump certainly didn't subscribe to this view, but a lot of other people did, that, Zelensky could walk on water. And nobody in Ukraine ever thought Zelensky could walk on water. I mean, they don't think that about their leaders. That's part of the street-based democracy. They're very skeptical of authority. And they were
As
from
are
the
we.
beginning with that.
As are we. I mean, George Washington wrote letters that said, if I'd known I'd be treated like a common pickpocket, I would never have agreed to be the president. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's
Um,
good. That's how it should be.
that is
No
how it
kings.
should be.
No kings.
No kings. Well, I, I wonder if this even registers where you are, but it's certainly registered in the American right wing. There's this person named Laura Loomer who's paid a visit to the Ukraine.
Of
Is
course.
that registering over there at
Of
all?
course.
Well,
Oh
tell me
yeah,
about
yeah,
that.
yeah. No, they follow. Well, I mean, so I mean, let's step back a minute. I mean, very mixed feelings about Trump, right? I mean, in Ukraine. I mean, Biden, for the reasons that you laid out, people loved Biden in the beginning and were very grateful to Biden, but they did learn very quickly that he was helping with he was only helping so far, and then he was allowing them. The metaphor was to fight with one, they insisting really that they fight with one hand tied behind their back, giving
Hmm.
just enough to do so certain things, but not enough to do other things. So when Trump came, Ukrainians were hopeful. Maybe he'll be more decisive. And they sort of hoped he would take their side and, help decisively to defeat Russia. Obviously, that didn't work
Lesson
out.
learned.
So people were but people were quite hopeful about Trump in the beginning, and then big disillusionment. But there's still a sense, and Zelensky feels this, I would say, even more than or seems to be going to be able to bring Putin to the table to end the war. Now, is anybody going to be able to bring Putin to the table to end the war? I don't know, but Zelensky is determined to keep trying that. I mean, in the beginning, I thought he was sort of going along because it was better not to be in the penalty box. But I've come to believe Trump's penalty box. But I've come to believe that he really thinks that's the only way. That Europe can help, but Europe can't really bring it to a close, and maybe Trump could bring it to a close. And so Laura Loomer is important in that scheme of things because she might be a canary in the coal mine for Trump. Now, is that true? I mean, did she really make was she legit and sincere and above board and all that? Nobody seems to know. How much influence does she really have over Trump? Nobody seems to know. Did she sort of soften first and then Trump did, or did Trump sort of soften first and tell her she could go? It's all shrouded in a ton of mystery. But the fact that Trump is seeming friendlier, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that he likes a winner, is seen as important in Ukraine. If for no other reason than they need the Patriots so badly. So, maybe there'll be more Patriots to be sold to the Europeans for Ukraine, or maybe they can make Patriots here, or maybe America will find some to give. I mean, that's the most important thing. And then maybe there'll be some help with making a fair peace deal as opposed to the ridiculous unfair peace deal that Trump put on the table all these past, however many months it's been.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, Laura Loomer could just be a crazy blip story of, laughable, or she could be the beginning of some sort of, interesting thaw. I mean, the other interesting story was that sort of equally colorful was that a Ukrainian boxer came to Washington. I don't know if it was to participate in the cage fight in the White House or just to watch it, but somebody
Yep.
got him in the room with Trump. And they they hit it off. And he told the president, Ukrainians are winners, and we're democratic. We don't like to follow authority, and you should
Yep.
get behind us. And they talked about Muhammad Ali, and it was apparently a great meeting. I mean, I read about it in the press, but I heard about it from somebody who's in the room. Apparently, it was a great meeting, and so the gradual bringing Trump around. The sort of hilarious stories that are sort of bringing Trump around to the idea that Ukraine is a winner is a big thing. Now, nobody knows exactly what Trump owes Putin or feels he owes Putin or what that tie is,
Right.
what hold Putin has over
Right.
him.
Right.
And despite this nice thaw that we're seeing now, it's quite possible that Putin will reach out and say, "Don't you dare, Donald," and it'll have an effect. I just don't
Yeah, as he
know.
has in the past.
And we also don't know, as he has in the past. And we also don't know. I mean, this is important to say before the conversation ends. A desperate Putin is going to be an even more, an even crazier Putin than we've
Okay, that's on
seen,
my notes
dangerous
to ask
Putin
you
than we've
about.
seen.
You have said
Well,
since the
that's
beginning, along with everybody else, that desperate Putin does desperate things, and like the time for Putin to become desperate is closer and closer.
closer and
You
closer.
know,
I mean, I'll tell you, I literally dreamt last night that he dropped a tactical nuke in Kyiv. So that was, I mean,
Americans are dreaming the same horrible thing about us and Iran because of the
well,
rhetoric of the president. It's
indeed,
terrifying and
crazy.
awful.
I get it, but I mean, and there are other things he could do. He could start, Kyiv doesn't look like Gaza, I dare say. That there's been a lot of shelling, but it doesn't look like
Mhm.
that. He could do a lot worse than he's been doing, and there could be firebombing. I mean, there are all kinds of horrible things. I don't even like to mention them.
Don't think about it.
So and there could be attacks on Europe.
Well, yeah,
Um,
that has other consequences. But speaking of terrible things that haven't happened yet where you are, I wonder, we say, and we in the United States say to our president, you cannot hit civilian infrastructure. You cannot uh, bring war against civilians. That is a war crime, and it's a terrible thing. I have to ask you about Crimea because what Ukraine is doing there with their blockades and everything, is making for those who, I mean, for the Russians who are there, they are desperate to get out. Everybody like it's no longer a livable place for people, and that is
Right.
that's I understand it militarily. I find it very difficult uh,
Morally.
morally. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I get that. Um, what do I say about it? I mean, I think that line is squishier than we think. In some ways, civilians, I mean, targeting civilians to kill them is one thing. Making it, harder to get gasoline is a different thing. Um, and I guess, and you should certainly let civilians out of a conflict zone. And I guess that's something maybe Ukraine could do more of. But I mean, wars for a long time, since Sherman, have terrorized the civilian population, or since before, since, Greek times, no doubt. I mean, what historians mostly find is that it backfires, that it just solidifies resistance. I mean, I think there is, so and to the degree that's true, Ukraine is walking a fine line or walking down a slippery slope, and I guess they're getting walking down it. I don't think they're at the same place on that slippery slope that Russia is by any
that's
stretch.
right.
I
That's
think
right.
Russia deliberately targets civilians, and Ukraine targets military infrastructure that happens to have consequences for civilians. I mean, that's sort of the challenge. It gets harder and harder to target military infrastructure that doesn't have consequences for civilians. And at some point, you on that slippery slope, you do have to sort of stop yourself, or all along the way, you do have to try to restrain yourself. Is Ukraine restraining itself enough? Good question. Fair enough. I mean,
It's
there's,
a very, I
fair enough.
mean, war is a horrible thing, and
Right.
people continue. I mean, the Ukraine's biggest advocate in the United States Senate just died, Lindsey Graham. Um, as Donald Trump said at Lindsey Graham's funeral, Lindsey never saw a war he didn't love. So his notion of advocacy was always war, and war is a terrible thing.
Yeah, well, as Lindsey Graham said about Trump, I don't know if you've seen the excerpts from that documentary. He loves blowing things up. They're a match made in heaven.
Yep, yep. Well, hell,
No, I mean, and
hell.
Lindsey Graham, was a complicated guy. I used to work on immigration reform. I knew Lindsey Graham, complicated guy, and what can you say? There's a lot to be said. That's a whole show, Lindsey Graham and Lindsey
Yeah,
Graham's
I don't
relationship
want to
with
have that
Trump.
show
And
because he's not that interesting for me.
yeah,
But
good.
he was an advocate for you for at least the military response in Ukraine.
Yeah, well, he was complicated. Remember after the Oval Office, he dissed Zelensky along with the rest of them. He was manipulating Trump. For a long time, he had sort of Trump's number, and he didn't even really think of it as manipulating. He just thought of it as politics.
Yep.
And it meant that he wasn't always on Ukraine's side.
Yeah, I agree with
He
that. All right, I have one more
was
question before I let
often
you go.
on Ukraine's side at an important time. Yeah.
Yeah, one more question before I let you go. The last time we talked, you spoke about how the country was learning both to be innovative and to navigate small d democracy, and your example was tenant organizations. You talked about like how people in your building, the one you no longer live in, figure out like, do I fix the elevator or do I fix the roof first? What's the conversation, and then how do we get it done? Right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
like talk about that kind of development still going on in the country and
Well,
what its consequences.
my as they call them OS Bay, my OS Bay in that building is still vital, and sometimes they're talking about, do we repair the roof hit by the missile, or is somebody parking in the wrong place? There's a
Right?
chat. It makes a good bedtime reading. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And who's what dog is relieving himself in the wrong place. But there's also the military units are also real bedrocks of, or cauldrons or something of, kind of leadership. And it's due, in other countries you'd say military leaders as politicians, and we don't like that, but it's definitely true in Ukraine that units sort of run themselves in many ways. They have to get their own funding and buy their own weapons, and commanders have a lot of leeway in how they treat the men, and their leadership is developing there. And it's also true that leadership is developing in these companies. The military, the drone makers and the innovators. And so
Oh, I
So
think
it's
I've lost.
not exactly, again, I don't see much happening. Sorry, am I still there?
Yeah, if
Internet connection.
you were gone for just a few seconds.
Oh, yeah, I don't see much happening. I mean, there's German foundations, teaching the political parties how to run a party better, but I don't think that's the main place that people are learning democracy. I think it is in the street demonstrations, in the leadership in the military, to some degree, the entrepreneurs, and and I mean, you just have to hope that when the lid gets lifted, political talent will come out and organizations will come together. I mean, it's
This distinction you just made, Tamar, between um, the Germans teaching how to build political institutions, if you will, parties and political institutions, and the people learning a taste for democracy. This is the distinction that I believe is going to save the United States because we have a government that is destroying our political institutions and co-opting our political institutions. At the same time, Americans are relearning their taste for democracy. And we'll see which one gets there first. But it's a really interesting and fair distinction.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't always work out. People in the streets aren't always like the best deciders of political
That's right.
decisions.
That's
And
right.
populism is not always, the best. That is, we all got mixed feelings about populism. But I think you're right. I think, people, and that's the difference between Ukraine and Russia. Ukrainians are determined to have a voice and not let leaders get away with, what have you. And again, I think the military is sort of interesting because people learn to lead, men learn to lead men. I mean, they are mostly men, but you learn, leadership is a really important quality.
Mhm.
And I think, and again, there's some dangers there. There's some dangers of demagogues, who are sort of popular military leaders, but, we'll see.
Well, I mean, you're
Um,
not really describing populism because it's not one movement. What's going on to create the leaders in the drone companies is different than the leaders on the front. It's different than the folks who are getting together to figure out whether to fix the roof or your neighbor's dog in the building. These are all different forms of the same yearning to have some agency in the world you live in
yeah,
that
yeah.
underlies democracy. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that in Ukraine. There's no lack of people like yearning for agency. Uh,
Okay. Any issues with food supply during all of this?
and
No.
there's avocado toast in every cafe, and they do not grow avocados in Ukraine, I guarantee you.
And
And there's still good Czech beer in my supermarket.
early on, we were worried that Ukrainian grain would not get to markets. Have we found ways to make that happen?
Yeah, I think so they created a corridor, in the Black Sea. They
Yeah.
used drones and knocked the Russian fleet back to the corner of the Black Sea, and they
Mhm.
created a corridor, and I think that corridor works fine. I recently visited the sort of export port facilities in Odessa, and there've
Mhm.
been a lot of destruction there. But I think the numbers are pretty much back to like 2021
That's
numbers
great.
for grain
That's
exports,
great
or
for the
close,
world.
they're high anyways. They may
Yeah.
not be back, but they're high. Um,
Well, I appreciate the chance to catch up with you to get this um, really interesting uh, report, not just on the war, but on the evolution of that society, both internally and its place in the world.
well, I appreciate the chance to talk to you as always.
Thank you.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Thank you. I will try.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I am thrilled to be joined again by Dr. Elizabeth Jacobs. She is an epidemiologist, professor emerita at the University of Arizona, and a founding member and the driving force behind Defend Public Health. Who would have thought that's something that needs defense, but it sure does. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here again.
So the fellows in charge, continued to be determined that America's scientific research, all of that grant money, become a giant slush fund for them to hand out for a political appointee to hand out where he wants. What's going on with their attempt to change the rules?
So there's a couple things going on right now. One is that there is a rule that's coming out of OMB, and of course that's Russell votes, that is proposing to require political review of scientific grants, but I really want to point out that it it goes much further than that. So federal grants that go to cities to improve roads or to build bridges and things like that will also require political review. And we just saw that federal funds, the US government has just admitted that federal funds were denied from certain states simply because of who they voted for. And this is
Including mine.
yeah, it's alarming.
Yep.
So there's no other way to say it. This is the situation in which we find ourselves right now. The other piece is that there was just a report released about the golden age of science that was written by somebody who is an accolade of Peter Thiel. And he is proposing basically that the funding that goes to universities for research and that universities rely on just to be able to function, he's proposing that we divert that funding, a decent portion of it anyway, to venture capital. Because his thesis is that, hey, these companies can do such a better job of sciencing
Mm.
than actual researchers at universities.
Well, let's stop there for 1 second.
Yeah.
This is history I actually know. America's universities were not the center of American commercial research for a long time. We had places like Xerox PARC that did unbelievable cutting edge research, but the companies said, you know what, this basic research stuff is too expensive. It takes too long to commercialize. We need partners who will take that risk. And the government is better off funding university researchers to do this research. And we'll jump in far later in the research life cycle to find research that we can commercialize. That's what we're good at. So the companies walked away from research and begged the government to set up these foundations that funded research in universities. And now you got a guy like Peter Thiel, who, for political reasons, says we don't like them, but he has no ability to use this money any better. He has no ability to. He certainly will refuse to use it for upstream basic research, the stuff that has changed the world. He'll grab early advantage. So it is utter word unsayable on radio, but it has a B and an S in it, that describe what they're trying to do.
No, absolutely. There are so many angles to why this is dangerous. And it's not just because universities could collapse um, without this funding, but just even the potential for corruption is just off the charts in this situation. The way science is chosen for funding by the government now involves peer review by experts, which, is never perfect. I'm not even going to try to argue that it is, but what it does is really significantly reduce the odds of corruption in this government funding situation. And I hate to say it, but universities won't be able to compete if we're in a head-to-head with venture capital firms in terms of getting funding, simply because they will be able to put all these bells and whistles. They will have dedicated people who can make these beautiful graphics and stuff like that.
They
Although I
won't pay
have
the
to
bribes. They
yeah,
won't pay
right.
the-
And so they'll get the
Yeah.
money. And the idea that science doesn't matter unless it's commercialized is completely contra to really how science works and how it should be done.
Yep. Um, and this potential for corruption is for these guys a feature, not a flaw.
Absolutely.
I have been thinking lately that about their propaganda, men's propaganda. And it's really not meant to make us forget that the president's a crook. It's not meant for us to forget that we're losing in Iran or that prices are up. It's really meant for us to forget who we are. about who Americans are, what America can do, what we have done, what we have built together. And one of the things that I think we could be most proud of is our incredible um, infrastructure to support science. It's one of the reasons why we've led the world economically and in public health because of this amazing science infrastructure that they want us to forget.
Absolutely. And we all benefit from it. And I really believe that if people who were subscribing to MAGA, for example, really stopped and thought about it and not being locked in this propaganda chamber, they would really be able to identify many ways in which, government funded science coming from universities has actually improved their lives. And that's the tragedy here.
Well, that's one of the tragedies here. Let's talk about measles for a minute,
Oh, yes.
right? I mean, I think when you and I talked, it was a small outbreak in Texas last. That's not where we are today.
We are not. Um, it's interesting because the cases are worse this year than I think the last 30 years. I don't want to say combined, because that doesn't seem like it would work, but certainly we're in a terrible place with measles right now. And this, in the days before Trump, would have been manageable. We would have already crushed this epidemic, but we have people who are incompetent in charge. And I'm not talking about the people at the state health and local county health departments who are busting their butts to protect the people of their communities. I'm talking about the tip top. When you have somebody in charge of health and human services who is constantly undermining vaccines, this is the outcome. And we repeatedly tried to warn senators, this is going to be a problem if you confirm RFK Jr. And we saw this coming. Hundreds of thousands of health professionals and scientists said this was going to happen, and here it is. So it's really frustrating. And the fact that I suspect that somebody in the Trump administration was able to convince the Pan American Health Organization to delay their assessment of whether the United States still has measles elimination status, and they postponed that till after the election,
Mhm.
speaks volumes to me. And
Yeah,
we've lost it. Like, the reality
yeah,
is it is gone. We
yeah.
no longer have measles elimination status.
So um, the threat to public health um, isn't just measles. Um, for reasons that I know you've talked about, and I'd love you to say again, measles is a canary in the coal mine about the kinds of diseases that follow for reasons that have to do with how infectious it is, how fast it travels. Like, what else could we be looking at if we stay on this path?
There's a lot of different aspects to this that are important. One of them is that a small fraction of people, children, 10 years from now, are going to die from the measles infections that they're getting now. And it's going to be absolutely devastating for parents who don't necessarily know they could recover from their infection. And then they'll get this condition called SSPE, and it's a neurological condition and they will die. And it's rare, but we're playing a really dangerous game. Another piece is, we have this outbreak of cyclospora, and what is happening is having these concomitant simultaneous outbreaks is really devastating to, again, local, county, state health departments, because staffing decisions are made on the assumption that we have competent people in charge of public health at the highest levels. We don't have that. And so what we have now are numerous outbreaks going on at the same time that these smaller health departments do not have the capacity to handle at the same time.
And I guess if you just drop the vaccines, there are other diseases that don't spread as fast as measles. We haven't seen them yet, but you might see polio. You might see really terrible things come back.
This is absolutely true. And as you just said, measles is the canary in the coal mine because it is so contagious. It is just a warning sign of what is to come as vaccine coverage continues to fall. And we're seeing all over the place. The New York Times just did a piece on all of the state level attacks on vaccines and what the status of those are. So I really do encourage all of your listeners to, check states, what their states are doing in regard to trying to take away some of these vaccine requirements for school entry and things like that, because it's dangerous. That's our last stand against these continued outbreaks.
To take you up on that, to do what you're recommending requires that you trust the information that you're going to get. And this crowd in Washington is breaking trust left and right. I think it's because you also have to have trust to have elections. So what did you make of the I want to call it a hearing, the show trial they put Dr. Fauci through?
So I made the choice for my own self-care not to watch that hearing, but of course I knew that I would get a lot of clips, see a lot of clips and information from it. I summarized it as this hearing is the embodiment of what the Trump administration is currently doing to science overall. They are taking a process that was imperfect, as all things are, and blowing it completely out of proportion. It is absolutely just the embodiment of the persecution and the destruction of science that they are working on. And the bottom line is they don't want Americans to trust scientists or science or experts, and they are continuing to do these types of behaviors. And I really just want to say to your audience that what you saw with Dr. Fauci is going on constantly in the scientific world, where they are undermining every aspect of science. And you can ask why. I don't know why. I have my suspicions that this is revenge for COVID-19 and for various people being proven to be fully and wholly incorrect in their positions on that, including RFK Jr., Jay Bhattacharya, who's the head of NIH and CDC, and others.
Right before we came on the air, we got news that not just Minnesota, but now a bunch of US states are having their water supplies attacked in a cyber attack that has not been fully identified by our government in public, but according to the states privately, they're being told this is an Iranian attack on American water infrastructure. I guess everything's connected because public health and clean water, I think, were invented together in some way.
That is for sure. There is a very long history, and I really recommend a book called Rose George about. It's called The Big Necessity, and it talks about not just water, clean water, but also sanitation. These are two really critical pieces, incredibly interesting things that we never think about until there is a massive catastrophe. And the Flint water crisis, what happened in Mississippi a couple years ago, and is still going on, to my understanding. Otherwise, we just assume the water is safe and everything's, jolly, but this is just tremendously dangerous because water is used for everything. And to circle back to cyclospora, that is probably most likely the result of contaminated water somewhere in the chain. I don't know where, but
yeah.
Yeah.
But this goes to like administration getting rid of scientists, purging them from government agencies, or if they have a certain stature, just trying to wreck their lives. But now we've also purged the defense intelligence apparatus, or turned it from looking at foreign threats. We're in a war. You'd think they would be interested in that, to trying to go after, I don't know, right? To go after people who they disagree with domestically, all of this makes us less healthy, less safe. I mean, we have 7 states now reporting a cyber attack on their water supply.
Yeah, it's really scary, and all of these things work together. And I think it was the last year or so, or last year, that I was talking about how the impact of some of these terrible foundational problems are actually not going to be fully visible to the public for a couple years because
Mhm.
our public health system is good. But canceling things like FoodNet, which RFK Jr. did, which was an active surveillance system where we were testing food across 10 states. And he said, well, this is redundant. Well, airplanes are very redundant. They have redundant systems. If something breaks, there's a backup thing so that your plane doesn't crash. Public health is an incredibly complicated system. We need redundancy for a reason. So, frankly, the idiocy of saying this is redundant and getting rid of it, we are now seeing the outcome of that. And I think that at least in Michigan, the number of cyclospora cases are starting to slow down. That doesn't mean there won't be more. It just means that the cadence is slowing. But yeah, this is what happens when you pull out redundancy.
Okay, so Elizabeth, how are you fighting back?
So one of the things that Defend Public Health and frankly the rest of the scientific world did in the past month, which I just have to say thank you to anyone listening who participated in sending comments about the OMB rule
Thank
to
you, I did.
require. Yes, thank you. Shout out to you and everybody else who did that, to try to fight back against this idea that federal funding should undergo political review, and take it out of the hands of the experts. So 500,000 people, 500,000 wrote comments. And I have to give a shout out to Mindy Rostel and other people at Defend Public Health Sadie Dean, who led this effort for Defend Public Health. But what will the impact be? Well, the government is required to address all of those comments. Now, they're not going to address 500,000 comments, but they need to address it. If they don't, that's against the law. I realize that they may not care, but the other piece is that attorneys can go into those comments and pull out these expert testimony of what the risk is here and use that in future lawsuits.
Okay, so that's one very powerful. And by the way, 500,000 is a pretty big number. What's the normal number of people who comment on a federal rule?
I honestly don't know. If I had to guess, there are a lot of federal rules that you can comment on.
Mhm.
I would guess that they maybe get under 1,000,
Yeah.
and that's probably generous.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
this was a huge effort because it's such a terrible idea.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I think it's really good when people can see something that really inspires them to go forward and take action like this. There is so much, as you had pointed out earlier, stuff that they're throwing out that it's really hard to focus on everything. But this one really hit home because it wasn't just science. It's also, like I said, communities who will be really adversely effective
Mhm,
or
mhm.
affected. Yeah.
So this is your lane is public health. And it's
Hmm.
what you're working hard to make sure it doesn't get eroded any more than already has been. And that we understand that we used to be good at this and that we are still not bad at it, but it's worth saving and worth thinking about again because it's an important topic. So if we are going to end this terrible era that we're in, people who have an interest like you do have to have allies who don't ever think about the things you think about. People like me who think about democracy all the time and not so much about public health, or people who think about civil rights all the time and not so much about public health and democracy, or people who think about whatever it is they think about. There are piles of things that people are passionate about. How are you forming alliances?
So in Defend Public Health, we have a lot of partners. There are a number of other really active groups right now. And like the American Public Health Association is a very strong ally. They are one of the few professional science or medical organizations that has regularly and consistently spoken out about the actions that are going on. And so we do work with many different groups to try to build that. People who are interested should definitely check out our website at Defend Public Health .org. And but there are other groups as well. I'm a representative of Defend Public Health, so obviously I'd like you to join our organization.
Yep.
But I don't care as long as you're active. You don't even have to join. Just follow campaigns, send that letter to your congressperson. Whatever strikes you as something that you're able to do, we are here for it. And we understand that, like right now with all the chaos, people just can't be in like a constant state of rage. Although I come close to that. Um, it's not a good plan. So just the little piece that you can do if you're inspired one day, just do it. And like I said, these types of, actions is what led to 500,000 Americans sending a comment to the US government, which again is absolutely
Incredible.
astounding.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but just the act of doing it reminds Americans that there are things they can do, that we are not bystanders to our demise. That, I mean, I teach about democracy to young kids who don't remember what it was, because Donald Trump has been their life, their college kids. And I say to them, you are so lucky to be alive right now because what you do matters. And we've had these moments before. And so let me tell you about some of them. They're pretty inspiring. And I think we have to remember that about ourselves. I mean, public health wasn't top of America's agenda for a long time. It took some really remarkable people to change our focus and to get us good at this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and a lot of it did come out of the military, for example, because in the past, all the way up through the Civil War, certainly the majority of soldiers who died while serving died of infectious disease. And so that's sort of where it came out with. But I
Yep.
really do, I want to thank you for the efforts you do in teaching that. My dad is a retired history teacher in ninth grade. I learned the power of democracy and the importance of it from him, and from my mom, who's a nurse. I learned the power of public health.
That's
So,
pretty great. I
yeah.
mean, look, what people, what the right will say to you is, look, every individual, that's what the center of every important decision is. But if you think about public health, what did we do that was individual? We told people, put down the cigarette, you'll be healthier. And it took forever, and we actually had to change society's views to get it done. But when we said we're gonna build sewer systems, we're gonna build clean water systems, that wasn't an individual. That was saying, I forget your well, your own private well. We're going to do this together, and nothing extended human lifespan more than clean water and getting the sewage out. Right? It was the biggest public health change in the history of our species, and it was something we did together.
Yeah, for sure. And another example of that was when Pittsburgh, the city of Pittsburgh switched from coal heating.
Right?
And that process is so incredibly interesting how they went about it. And that was a group team effort, largely driven by the fact that women in particular were really tired of having to clean their houses 3 times a day because this
the
ash
coal
was
dust.
falling everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, together, there's nothing that we cannot do together. We do have power, and people should be aware of that, because as people power, we can do anything.
Yeah, this whole propaganda machine is meant to teach us that we are helpless and to make us forget that the great things we've done in the past. So,
Absolutely.
and you keep doing them.
That's right. We all need to.
Yeah. All right. Just tell people how to find your stuff before you go.
Sure. So defendpublichealth.org is our website for our organization. And then I'm on Blue Sky at Elizabeth Jacobs, Threads as well. And I'd love to see you there. I love interacting with people and hearing about their stories and what is important to them. It really does help guide what Defend Public Health is going to do when we hear from people about the things they're worried about.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, everybody, we will be back in just a moment, and it'll be more public health as we talk about cyclospora, and it'll be surprising.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, it's summer salad season. No, just kidding. But we do have a food safety problem, and I want to get to the bottom of it. And I can't think of a better way than to talk to Brian Shannenberg, who is the executive director of the Institute for Food Safety and Health at Illinois Tech, and he's the industry professor for food science and nutrition there. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and happy to help where I can and provide any information that I've got at hand.
Well, let's start with just by way of background, talk about the Institute.
Great, and thanks for asking that. So the Institute is almost 40 years old in its mission to really solve food safety and health questions. And it's done through a cooperative agreement with the US FDA and actually industry membership. So it's really this idea of a consortium of all three coming together to solve those problems together instead of in silos.
And it's food safety and health. The United States, unlike, say, Saudi Arabia, doesn't have a food security problem in the same way, right? We have enough food. We just have to make sure it's safe.
We do have enough food. We definitely produce enough food,
Yeah.
and safety is always at the forefront. And the US and some other Western countries definitely have some of the safest food out there in production, even though we're seeing what we're seeing in the media right now.
Yep. And you said that the center is a cooperative effort that includes the federal government. The federal government is doing a lot of cuts. Has that affected you?
It hasn't affected us like in this moment in time. Have there been declines and cuts many years in the past? Yes. And then some years it kind of bumps up. It kind of depends on that year and what the FDA is really trying to focus on from a research perspective. Then we also have other agencies like USDA and others that will have other projects that add to that. Or we have industry projects and contracts that come in where we're also adding to that. So it is a flux, if you will, within the budget cycle. But for the most part, we haven't been fully impacted by kind of what those cuts are within the agency itself.
Well, that's good. That's very good. Keep your head down.
Yeah, right. We're all in that same phase right now.
Well, all right, let's turn to food safety. I'm going to probably say it wrong, the cyclosporasic outbreak.
The cyclosporiasis.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
It's in 45 states. Is that common, or is this really an unusual outbreak?
Sure. So I'll start with cyclospora, which is the parasite, if you will, that causes the cyclosporiasis in humans. It does happen every year. States usually may have 50-ish outbreaks, if you will, or people getting sick from cyclosporiasis, because again, you're dealing with fresh produce. It's harvested and eaten quickly. So, cleaning and all that, you don't really know what's the problem. So it's harder to prevent. This one is just at a different scale that we've never seen before. I mean, right now I see the numbers are recorded as over 18,000 reported across all of these states. About half of that, from what we've seen, has been actually lab confirmed, meaning they've done the testing of the individual, and yes, it is due to that parasite in that format. And then the others have the same symptoms and ate the same products, and then they're probably still also in the test to see if they're confirmed. But we've just never seen it across this number of states with this many people specific to this parasite.
I mean, that's a surprise. I mean, 50 and 18,000. That is not. I mean, that's orders of magnitude. That's really shocking.
Right. That's why everybody's looking at this quickly, because it had to been in a large amount of product for this to have that many people consuming it and getting sick. And that's the biggest part. And then on top of that, when it takes about a week to incubate in the body or more, this is why we continue to see the rolling people get sick, start to report, or maybe they didn't have symptoms to start with. They kind of felt odd, but they didn't think it was bad. And then it came back. Because it is one of those things, if you really have it, you need to treat it with antibiotic But there might be a handful of people out there as well that may not have any symptoms. It just kind of flushes through through their system.
So what accounts for this being so uniquely? I mean, well, let me say it this way. I'm not a journalist, I'm a partisan. And I don't want my political views to cloud the facts. So let me just tell you where my view takes me and then correct me.
Sure.
This outbreak feels like a maybe preventable failure at some point. We didn't catch it early. We didn't contain it. We're not sure where it began. As a matter of sort of public health rather than food safety, we haven't been completely clear about what people should do. Is that fair?
It's a combination of both. I would say everybody's trying to make safe product. There's no company that wants to have their consumers getting sick off their product. And there are plenty of regulations in place that dictate how you produce this kind of product and put it to market. So in that concept, then we should be seeing data where all of these, so from harvest to manufacture, wash, cut, to package, there's water testing that takes place in all of these phases. There's no data pointing to those outbreaks, right? So that's what's really kind of getting stuck, is we know it's centered on this cut iceberg lettuce, all of these stores consumed by these individuals, traces all the way back through to an area of Mexico where they're producing iceberg lettuce based on FDA's statements to date and information they had. But there's been no confirmatory positive tests to actually show that any of the water was contaminated along that supply chain in the time frame that this product was produced. So this is where everybody's really confused. And this happens a lot in science, right? We have good intent, we have preventive controls, we're learning, we're root causing, and we just have to continue to evolve with this organism. And it's not as easy as most things to test for. The test is good, but it's much more difficult. So you could have one person run it and may not get the same answer as another person.
Is there, did the cuts along the way in our government mean that even though the regs are still in place, is there less inspection? Are there fewer tests? Are we relying more on the industry to test itself than we have in the past? These things would allow an outbreak more easily. Are we in that world?
No, we're not. And actually, it's the opposite right now, interestingly, right? Yes, you're seeing agency cuts just across the congressional budgets in many things.
Yes.
But with the new Human Foods Program under the new leadership at FDA, they're taking the approach to do more auditing. So they've already started that. So the auditing is going up and increasing. But they also are partnering and giving states the ability to go in there and do that on their behalf, so that they're increasing the pool of auditors. And typically a lot of these, whether it's California that's coming in where Taylor Farms is located, or Mexico, we still have every right to go down there and audit all those spaces. Anything that comes to the US market has to comply with the US regulation. So they're actually increasing inspectors, and they're actually doing more than you'd expect. But we're talking millions of products that come in and get consumed by the United States. So even if you increase audits, you still have a low risk scenario of them being caught. And caught not in a bad way, but just saying the FDA will look at what is the hazard of this commodity. Fresh produce is one of them. You're going to see more auditing taking place in these facilities than you would something that's more packaged, like a can of beans or something, right? That's gone through this thermal process, pretty safe for the most part, and they'll go in there every few years and actually audit them.
Well, all right, that's all really interesting. And I made a note. I wanted to ask you about this, about the changing role of states in their relationship to the federal government and the relationship to keeping us safe. Are there some states that are stepping up more than others? Are there some states? I mean, this outbreak's in 45 states, I think.
Right.
And I'm
You have some
guessing
states with their own public health programs.
Yep.
Definitely are more advanced or equal to. So California, being as big as it is and what it does, they definitely have a huge system within their state agency. And so it's good they work in tandem. And with the FDA's change to using states more often, they are funneling money to them to help support building out those other states. With a lot of your smaller states, Midwest and the South, that's where they'll need help, right, to up that level of audit and state compliance and impact.
Are the states that have their own programs big agricultural states? Were they, or is it unrelated to?
It's unrelated in the sense, I would say California, of course, because of the scale that they are and the scale that they produce actually fresh produce or produce type risk products that go to consumer. You come to the Midwest, a lot of our farming isn't really product that's going to food. It's more going to other commodity space.
Yeah, or cattle.
Yeah. So Washington State will have some inspectors there in there as well because they produce a lot of your apples and berries and things like that. Florida would have as well in certain aspects of the fruit industry. And a lot of the states will have their dairy industries also covered in some of those spaces to help with that. And then you've got USDA side of things, but that if you're producing USDA products, then they're in every plant every day during production.
So what counsel would you give to the FDA about how to get us out of this mess?
Well, today they've done really everything they can based on the data they've been able to pull to date, right? So these are products, either one were fully consumed, they had them pulled from shelf if they still existed within this big bracket of time frame. They've stopped any import of product from that region of Mexico currently to ensure that it doesn't continue forward. So we should, even though it hasn't happened yet, we should start to see a decline in illness with the assumption that all the products now been removed from market. Sometimes it gets a little hard. Some places forget to pull it from shelf, unfortunately. But for the most part, we should be seeing this ramp down in the coming weeks. I can't guarantee that because, again, I think there's still that idea of, well, where did this really happen? But no current testing has actually been able to trace or confirm the actual source of infection or contamination.
Yeah. All right. So somehow it gets here. It is the only way it gets transmitted on the product, or can we give it to each other?
So we cannot transmit it human to human. It's not one of those parasites. So the parasite does need a human to start its evolutionary process of its cycle, but it needs about 1 to 2 weeks once it leaves the body to then convert into the infectious form of the parasite. So it's a waste stream from humans that then contaminates, unfortunately, this product line, especially fresh produce. So somehow sewage of some sort in some place was able to get into that water supply in some sort of scale and potentially was irrigated. So that's one mode that they're looking at. Did it get irrigated onto all of this product, spread evenly across it, and it loves to stick to these leafy greens because it finds all the nooks and crannies and holds on and gets harder and harder to wash off? Or is it post-harvest and it's in a facility that somehow had a contamination in their water supply as they were doing the full wash cut step? Now, again, all these facilities are supposed to have their full on test data at time points strictly by their operating procedures. But then again, there's no positive testing that I've seen or been reported out publicly yet that says there's the actual spot along that supply chain that's impacting it.
Does that strike you as odd? We have this huge outbreak and yet no one's been able to have a positive test anywhere?
It strikes all of us as odd. Like I said, all of the professionals that I was just with here in this last week down in New Orleans at the International Association of Food Protectionists Conference. So of course, everybody was talking about that. The agency and FDA cohorts that we work closely with that are the scientists, same. You're right, they're in the same space of water is the typical culprit here, but we don't have data that's giving us the pinpoint of where, other than traceback. So that's really where the FDA is now using this scheme of, we know this is the product based on all the interviewing we're doing that's been implicated or at least correlates to all these people. So they trace back all the way to that region of Mexico, and that's how they then use that recall. Voluntary, even though it's a voluntary, FDA does have actually authority to do forced recalls should that firm not voluntarily pull it from market.
Okay, I'm kind of stunned and trying to understand. So you're doing what all of us remember from COVID as contact tracing, right? It's like you're going backwards from this group of people got ill. What did they eat? Where did it come from? But going the other direction, all of the tests appear negative. Um,
Right.
right. So there are a bunch of different possibilities. One is that it's come some other way that we haven't figured out, right? And it seems
Yeah, there's
unlikely,
no
but
way really other than a water supply.
right, but not one that we found.
Right,
Right.
correct.
So, so,
But and
so
at this scale, right? So that's the big part of this that's really confusing. Like I said, when I say 50, maybe on average a year in a state, small scale,
yeah,
because again, it's one contamination point. This definitely was a water supply that was used, and at some point the testing bookended it, meaning it didn't hit the point of where it was contaminated, but it was enough to spread evenly across a huge crop stream, and then just kind of propagated from there as it went through the supply chain and hit many products.
okay. So again, I'm more questions. So that means that that we now know. Well, first, we live in such an era of distrust and
Yep.
such an era of corruption in so many places that you have to believe you can trust the tests or they're being reported honestly.
Right.
But assume they are for a minute. This argues that we're not testing frequently enough. Is that right?
It could be a root cause and corrective action that we do go backwards and look at to say why, right? And if that is the case, then guidance would come out to say you need to start testing more. And within the company themselves, they also potentially, I don't know because I don't know the workings within Taylor Farms to answer this for them, but you would think they'd be going backwards and looking as well to say, did we test enough? Do we have the right amount of data? And should we reconsider what our current testing plan is and process? And that's typically what happens when some of these outbreaks happen. Because again, we have multiple outbreaks of different things every year in food. Most of the recalls to date are now preventative, meaning they're catching them before they actually get to consumption, which is exactly
Great.
what the
What should
regulation is
happen.
supposed to do. It looks bad because it's in the media, but when it says preventive, you should take that as, hey, the agency's starting to do a good job to get this off the market, because it is really on the manufacturer or the maker of that products. That's their responsibility to produce safe food for the consumer. FDA is there to help guide them, but
Yep.
in the end, that company is the responsible party.
Well, we have a philosophical divide in government. There are those who say, yes, everybody says, yes, the companies have to do this. There's some who say, and the market will take care of that. If they give you food that makes you sick, people won't buy it anymore. The company will go broke. And so that's how we can keep us all safe. And there are others who say that's utter nonsense. It's too late. It's not that's not the way to do this. So, and that pendulum swings back and forth. And we're in the market will take care of it swing at the moment.
Right. Yeah, the more you see stuff on the media, like you see every day when I see pop-ups, I always see pop-ups of recalls of something.
Yep.
I always have to go in and read what they are, because in many cases they might be a low class and it's not going to hurt you. It's just because something happened in the quality of the product, but it just hits out there in that. So consumers definitely, the more they see it, the less they'll trust it. But if we look at true numbers of impacts, right, we're less than 0.005% of the population running into this. I'm not saying that's the right thing to say, but food's always going to be in a space, especially fresh produce and some of these commodities that are more high risk. It's almost impossible to have zero risk. Right.
And I still healthiest for us.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So there's always this risk scenario of I need my healthy food because greens and salads and fruits, vegetables are an important part of the healthy diet. But yes, with that, they're fresh. And so once they're consumed, there's not that preventive control really kind of in there from a testing perspective. The produce safety rule does have clear definitions on how these guys are supposed to produce safe food for the consumer. But we learn as we go. And sometimes if we kind of go backwards a little bit, McDonald's had the big recall of the chopped onions back out of Colorado with E. coli, something nobody expected. It wasn't typically the pathogen of concern in that commodity. So that all of a sudden made us have to rethink some of the science. And then you can go back a little further, and there was a big peaches recall, again, fresh peaches, due to salmonella. Again, something you typically wouldn't see in that product because it's more related to chicken and eggs and things like that. And so They learned that, unfortunately, that salmonella does desiccate and dry out, becomes airborne, and got blown out of these chicken farms, travels, and lands on these beaches in the farm across the way. So now the question is, how do we start to think about our agricultural process to make sure that we're trying to prevent these things from happening when they're least expected? So the science is still evolving as we learn more. And these organisms, by the way, they're just like us humans. We all want to survive. So they're looking at every way possible to evolve and get out of that space where we can kill them.
Yeah. This is a forever battle.
Yep.
It's a forever battle.
It's a battle back and forth.
Yeah. I mean, that's true with every pathogen, I think. So what keeps you up? What having seen this outbreak, what is it that worries you about structurally about how we're dealing with all these things going forward? Because this has got to be like, oh my gosh, we thought we were doing well, but there's something we need to think about.
Yeah, this one we're definitely going to have to take as a case scenario to look back and see and understand why the scale that it is. If I look at the overall intent, so when the Food Safety Modernization Act came in 15 years ago, that was really a step change in how we actually manage food safety in the US. It's a preventive model, it's a recall model, it's all of that to really start to protect consumers and ask these questions around what is true hazard. We've seen the benefit in that. We've seen reductions in recalls. We've seen reductions in product impacted by that. So we know there's a good process in place. It is enough of a regulation that even other countries have followed suit. Canada's followed up with a similar. Now we're equal in that space. China even followed suit with them producing food kind of in a similar format. So we know it's the best science and possible place we can be in today. But with it, it's always about learning. It's always about understanding the why, and then how do we fix it? Okay. With the intent of having zero outbreaks, but we know zero is not in our future at this current state based on technology.
Yeah. Let me ask you about this act, because I don't know the Food Safety Modernization Act. But I am very interested in how good laws get made. Right? Well, so what happened that made the United States pass a law that actually helps everybody and get it passed and get it signed and then build the infrastructure to enforce it? Because we seem to be lacking that gene right now.
Exactly. So prior to 2011, there was still food law. There was still food safety laws on the books. But we still saw all of a sudden these huge outbreaks happen in 2008, 2009, 10, and they were just really getting the eyes of Congress to start looking at that more directly. To say, is the current one effective? No, it wasn't. And so really they came into it because the previous law did not allow or have mandatory recall power by FDA. It doesn't make sense. Nobody would have thought that, but that was the reality. They'd have to take them to court and it'd be a long battle to get it recalled. Today, the new regulation does give FDA full recall authority. So if you don't do it, they can do it. But the second most important part is it went from a reactive model. So previously, FDA only acted when something happens. So when an outbreak happens, FDA comes in. Today, it's a preventive model, meaning you must now, as a company, produce a full food safety plan for your specific plant and organization. It needs to have a preventive controls qualified individual on staff that creates that plan. At every point of the system has a hazard assessment to say, do I need to control for something at this point? So it's now about prevention. So if they find something in that process, like there was a number of listeria outbreaks in products, nobody had gotten sick, but yet because there was positive testing that came in post, they immediately recalled all of that voluntarily off the market as preventive, but nobody ended up ever getting sick from that.
That's fabulous.
Right. So that's the job of what this new regulation is really doing. That would be the core. It was then broken into a number of rules, big rules that took 15 years to finalize all of them. But the big one would be preventive controls for human food. There's also one for animal food. They're separate and similar. And then the most recent one, which is probably going to also be very beneficial soon, is the food traceability rule. It's now been set, but compliance date is not till 2028. So we're still looking at 2 years.
What is food traceability?
This basically states that you basically, instead of one step forward and one step back in a traceback model as a company, that's how we were told, hey, you need at least to understand where you got it, and you need to understand where it went. Now the supply chain will need to have from harvest to restaurant a single set of information that travels and tracks across that whole chain. So it's equal and identifiable, and it doesn't change when you go to another plant because they usually use their own tracking systems.
You're going to need some interesting technology for that.
They do, and
maybe
that's
a
kind of the
blockchain,
reason. Yeah,
because
that's the reason for
otherwise
the delay. Yeah,
yeah.
that's the reason for the delay till 2028 because companies are like, wait, this it's a lift. It's going to cost us money. We got to get the data set and the ability to do that. We got to get our partners that we're working with also to line up to that. But there's definitely a lot of good things with the new world of AI that, in theory, they should be able to build these systems faster, sooner.
They should. I mean, it sounds like a blockchain thing because otherwise
it's conceptually, yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's such potential for fraud on every step. I mean, somebody puts it in a truck and says it's something else. They're very tough. I know this because in the world of kosher food, rabbis have said, like, how do I know where it came from? It's very hard to do. Yeah.
Yep. No, and unfortunately, there's also economical adulteration that does happen. People do that, and that's another thing that's sad, but a very small percentage of that.
Say that again. You said economic adulteration?
Yeah, economical adulteration, right? They're doing something on purpose.
That's a technical word for cheating?
That's one of them, yes. Because you can have unintentional adulteration where something gets in there that you just didn't intend to do. And that's where a lot of these recalls come from. These guys are intentionally putting these pathogens into the product.
No, of course not. It's not.
But there are people out there that economically have gone out, not to get somebody sick. It's more usually around, to your point, it's a marketing claim. Hey, I have this region and sourced from here, and it's not. It's something mixed and diluted down from over here.
Yeah, or as anybody who's ever been in a bar knows, you can water down the gin.
You're right. That exactly. So, and that's really how, to be honest, the food safety history in the United States was built back in the era of Teddy Roosevelt.
Well, you're in Chicago. I'm in Chicago.
Right? Yeah,
we had the first manufactured food, and oh my God, what problems we had.
Problems. People were putting fake milk on the market and feeding these kids that were dying because they were putting white plaster in it to color it. So because of all of that, it really did trigger that next stage to say, hey, wait, the national government really needs to step in from a federal standpoint and create standards, and we need to monitor and act and not just let the states kind of go at it.
Okay. And just to go back before we're done, where I began, you remain confident in your federal partners. They haven't been, this part of our government has not been politicized like other parts. Is that right?
I am totally committed with the partners that we have and the expertise they have and what they're trying to do. The Human Foods Program is just one piece of the entire FDA, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got drug, which is really the core of most of the money and funding and things that are going over there. Then you have the Human Foods Program, which centralizes everything now under that umbrella. They are committed staff members. Everybody I've worked with, from the deputy down, have all been committed to food safety, and there's no way that I've seen them shying away from that.
That is such good news that I'm almost tempted not to air this interview and let them know. Because I worry a lot in the world we're in. It's, it is.
It's a rough time for all of us. A lot of things are going down, up and down cuts. And there was no doubt, even with the Doge activities over a year ago, the FDA colleagues that we have, so they're co-located actually with us on our campus. So that's how we get to do research side by side with them. Mm-hmm. They were all scientists that were let go in one of those. We did a very good effort, and 6 weeks later, they were reinstated. So at least from that perspective, at that time, Kyle DeMontis, who's now acting as the head of FDA, he was great, and he was a proponent of ensuring safe science and safe products, and he helped get those guys back working.
I'm very happy to hear that. Very happy to hear that. Well, I really appreciate your time and your work. If the general public wants to go somewhere to sort of understand when it's safe to go back and buy lettuce or just keep up generally, what do we do?
I mean, the core place to go is everything is in live update on FDA's website or CDC's website. Those are your two places for some, even though I know cuts have happened in those agencies, that hasn't stopped their communication and information on this.
on this topic.
And it's again, this is specific now to cut iceberg lettuce. Like I still have eaten my mixed greens. I've eaten, baby spinach. I've done some of those things still in this. I haven't just wiped everything out. Or go to a farmer's market, because then you have more of a touch point, the farmer, and it's a little less risk. It's not zero risk still. You still got to wash it, but you at least know it's in a small scale that you're not going to have the same level as this repackaged product.
Well, again, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me, and reach out anytime if you need anything further.
All right, everybody, we'll be back.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Okay, I've saved like the best for last here. Ami Fieldsmeyer is a senior fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School. What that really means, I'm sure he won't tell you this, is that he's held really important jobs in government and will again when the administration changes. That's what that means at the Kennedy School.
I appreciate your vote of confidence, Edwin. That's nice.
Well, his work there is like our work on this show. It is about our democracy, how to protect it and how to renew it. And he recently co-authored with Julia Angwin this fabulous book called On Courage, How to Be a Dissident in an Age of Fear. And it's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be with you and appreciate all of your good work.
Well, let's start with our good work. You're in the democracy business. I'm interested to know what you think that means.
To be working on democracy?
To be in this democracy business right now. What does it mean?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I mean, I think, one thing that's been interesting, frustrating, fascinating is that I think that the salience of the word democracy has diminished over time. I think that a lot of the nonprofits and foundations that work on this stuff would tell you that from a sort of marketing perspective, trying to get resources and attention and energy attracted to their work, that there was a massive effort around quote unquote shoring up our democracy the last time we had this guy in office, and it didn't really work. And so there's a question about what it means to be doing this work. I also think that for a younger generation of people who do feel very invested in their future, the word democracy itself may have actually lost some salience, in part because it may not have been working for them all that well to begin with. If you can't afford a house, if you can't find a job, if you can't sort of be basically stable, then the sort of abstract principles of representative democracy, of having a constitutional republic, are just abstract principles. And so a lot of, I think, our work right now, those of us in the quote unquote democracy business, is first, I think, just to deliver for people and to make sure that people can live a good, dignified life. And that's the proof point I think people will need. We talk a lot about in this book, a lot of the book is just about people trying to seize on their values, and less about the sort of abstract notion of what a democracy might mean. But I think it's a really good question.
Well, let's turn to the book. There's first off, there are a lot of great stories. They're just inspiring, great stories. Do you have one that we don't have that much time. Do you have one that you love telling?
There's a story that I love telling about I guess maybe I'll just say one very quickly, which is we start the book on the idea of a moral collision. And this is sort of the basis of the book. A moral collision is this idea that people who become dissidents in some form or another, by which we really mean people who take a risk to defend their values in the context of, political repression, generally do so after they realize that something that they care about is clashing with what's going on in the world. And so we open the book on a story that I think is probably relatable to those of us who care about democracy, which is the story of a civil rights lawyer who was working in this Trump administration's Housing and Urban Development office. He was a civil servant, and he realized very early on in this administration that the people he was now working for were not going to enforce civil rights law. They weren't going to enforce the Fair Housing Act. And as a result, there were people all over the United States who were at risk of housing discrimination, eviction, and otherwise. And so he had this moment. And I think this is the kind of moment that many of us feel. It's not always as dramatic, between keeping his head down and keeping his job or blowing the whistle. and speaking out, both speaking out to Congress and also speaking out on the radio and on television to just alert the people who could do something about this, that the US government was no longer protecting people from housing discrimination, and that was putting lots of people at risk. And so he did it. And when you ask him, and this is the reason I would offer this as the example, Edwin, is because it's paradigmatic in our book. When you ask him, why did you do that? Why did you put your job at risk, the thing that you had trained for? Why did you put your livelihood at risk in order to for an abstract principle, as we're just sort of describing? And he says, I didn't do something that I felt was so courageous. I am a civil rights lawyer. That's the thing that I do. That's what I was put here for. That's what I've pursued.
Yep.
I was just doing what I do. I was just being who I am. And so I think a lot of our book is how do you preserve the values that are close to you? How do you continue to be who you are when the world is casting you as something like a dissident?
That story resonated with me because I worked at HUD in the Clinton administration.
Right.
So it caught me right away.
Yeah.
And your book is organized, as you say, it starts with this personal, like, okay, something has happened, and
Yeah.
I have a dilemma, I have a challenge, I have a decision. It's a very American kind of way of organizing. It's sort of starts personal. It's kind of self-help, but
Yeah.
but you expand to how you go from that moment to building a community that keeps you safe, a community that makes you effective, and you did this by looking all over the world at where people have done this successfully.
Over the course of under a year, my co-author Julia Angwin and I spoke to over 100 people, about 120 people, dissidents, opposition leaders, activists, people who have faced down some kind of oppression all over the world, from the United States to Venezuela to Russia to Nicaragua to Hungary to Hong Kong and beyond. And what happens when you do that kind of unscientific but sort of scientific review is that you start to notice trends. And so the reason we structure the book this way is because this is what we found. We found that people would generally, you're right, Edwin, it is very American to start with the individual and not necessarily with the collective, but a slightly less cynical finding was that people who had the moment like the one I just described, we also profiled toward the beginning of the book a Venezuelan woman in the outskirts of working class Caracas, who had been part of the Maduro Chavez political apparatus. She had been the beneficiary of lots of political patronage, and they had helped her with her job and her career. She was the first person on the food line. At some point, when there was an economic crisis, she realized that she had been duped and she had been lied to, and that she wasn't able to feed her children anymore. And so she also had this moral collision moment. So she, like the guy at HUD and like people all over the world, very quickly found other people who shared those values and shared those concerns. And we call that in the book, it's a Jewish concept. We call it a minyan, making a minyan, right? You find in Judaism, there's an idea of you can only do certain prayers, you can only grieve, you can only be called to the Torah, very important things, holy things. You can only do that with 10 other people. And the idea is that because to share emotionality, to share important experience, you have to, there is something unlocked by being around other people. So this is something we find over and over again. I'll give one example of this from history, which is that the Soviet dissident movement, who a lot of people think about when they hear the word dissident, the Sakharovs of the world, I should say not of the world, but of the Soviet Union, that movement never grew to be more than about 1,000 people at any given time, and aided, with the aid of geopolitical forces, we're really able, in these pods of a few people all over the place, we're able to help bring down an empire, a very repressive empire. And what we find when we read about and we talk to former Soviet dissidents is that they say gathering with people regularly did two things. One, it was pragmatic. It allowed you to plan. For them, it was like, how are we going to smuggle Samistat out of here? How are we going to get our writings out to the rest of the world to undermine the regime? But it was also something spiritual, which is to say it was emboldening, right? Authoritarianism, as we found in this country, is the government says, you thought you saw Alex Preddy shot in the street? No, you didn't. You thought you saw Renee Good shot in the street? Think again. And so when that's happening, when you're just hearing lies and lies and lies, the other piece of gathering with other people in these political homes that we're talking about, that we think Americans should organize in more, is that both it allows you to plan pragmatically, but also to have the sort of spiritual boon of being emboldened by people who see what you see, who believe what you believe, and then can push you to go even further in your activism.
I love that. I mean, and the examples, I mean, there's so many, and there's so many good ideas, like accompanying somebody,
Mm.
just that make all the difference and make us feel like we're safe. And then, when accompanying somebody turns into bringing a blanket, turns into something bigger, like you end up being tell the story that you told the other day about the fellow who was a volunteer and then ended up having a huge role in Hong Kong.
Yeah, and I was glad that you came. So we had this great event in Chicago a couple weeks ago at the Onion headquarters, which is, and I should just shout, like, I know we're talking to Chicago and Midwestern folks. The Onion has become this sort of bastion of democracy, I think, and it's a pretty amazing place and group of people. So I'll tell about. So this is a guy named Nathan Law. Nathan Law is now about 32 years old, but when he got involved, 32, 33, something like that. But he was a student, a first-year student at a university in Hong Kong when at the beginning of what was called the Umbrella Revolution. Obviously, Hong Kong has been as an island city, has been in a mortal fight with China for many years over its sovereignty and independence. And there, as often is the case, the most recent iteration of a movement to push back and against China, the Chinese government, began with students, and it began on university campuses where a lot of this stuff incubates. So Nathan describes himself as a very risk-averse person. He had dreams, actually, of traveling the world and of learning a language. He said that he also really wanted to learn how to play guitar. And as a result of all of that, he just was a risk-averse guy. He didn't see himself getting involved, but he had run for student government just to be kind of, as an activity. And he said he went to the first meeting of the organizing around the protests for what would become the Umbrella Revolution, these massive wave of protests against for Hong Kong sovereignty. And he describes that there were they gave volunteers three options for how they wanted to be involved in the protest. You could either be in the front row of the protest and you were essentially risking arrest. You could be in sort of a little bit further back, but helping to make up the mass of people to show the cameras and others that there were a lot of people there. Slightly less risky. Or the third option was you could just bring the water bottles. Bring water bottles and hand them out to your fellow students so they had something to drink and weren't dehydrated. And he describes to us, and we write about this in the book, almost instinctually, he checked the last one, water bottles, no risk at all. Nathan Law, as a result of going to bring the water bottles and witnessing both the camaraderie of what was happening to the people who were on the front lines, but also the brutality that people were being beaten and pepper sprayed on the front lines, he saw so much and he felt so connected to this community that one thing led to another, and he was very quickly one of the faces of the movement. He was ultimately nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by a bipartisan group of U.S. senators, and became one of the China's most wanted figures, and had to flee and now lives in London in exile. But it's a perfect example of something that we see over and over again, which is that you don't have to start at the front. And the truth is that you don't even have to end up at the front. But there are these small asks. And maybe I'll end with this for now, which is just to say, I've worked on political campaigns, as I know you have intimately. And one thing that you would think that the way to get somebody really involved in your campaign is to do something for them, is to prove to them that you can do something for them. But the truth is, as you know well, as a long-term political person, is that actually the best thing to do is to ask them to do something for you, to ask them to knock on a door, to ask them to make a phone call, or even to give some money. And what they do, when that happens, people end up feeling invested in the story and a character in the story and invested in the outcome. And so we see that over and over again all over the world, from the United States to Hong Kong to Chicago and beyond.
Your book does not, however, make light of dangers that these dissidents have felt. You have a whole section on threats and violence. But in the end, and I mean way in the end, because it's in the acknowledgments section at the end, you quote like an 18th century Ukrainian rabbi who says, know that a person needs to cross a very, very narrow bridge. And the rule, the essence is not to give in to fear at all. Square that. I mean, are you really telling people go face the bullets? Or are you saying something like, it's okay to be afraid, but don't give in to it?
What we're saying, actually, I think our book takes very, very seriously the threats that people feel.
I think so too.
I think actually that, I think that if we had wanted to write a book, if we had written a book about like the Navalny's of the world, not to minimize the extraordinary courage of these people, but the Navalny's or the Mandelas or the Gandhis or Malala, these people who
Sure.
are sort of preternaturally courageous, I think that would have been an interesting book, but I'm not sure how it would have been an especially helpful book for regular people. Like, I'm a regular guy. I'm not like those people. And most of us are like that also. And so we wanted to write a book that took really seriously the reasons that people don't take political risks, that people don't stand up for their values,
and then end up doing it.
And then do it anyway. Like, what is it about the people who do end up doing it that makes them do it? And I think what we find is that it is rarely, as I just use this word, it's rarely preternatural. It's rarely magic. What it is actually that saying that you just described, which is that it's acknowledging that this is scary and then finding ways to do it anyway. And the section that you're describing, I would say, which is called on threats and violence or something, it's the sort of don't do stupid stuff chapter, is saying there. I think that we assume that great political dissidents are people who take enormous risk and sort of just deal with whatever. If they kill me, they kill me. If they jail me, they jail me. And that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is you should minimize the risks. There are things that you can do. We should be aiming for no unforced errors. And there are, the theory that we lay out, that somebody describes to us as of staying safe under political repression, is what we call a Swiss cheese theory, which is like no one thing. You could use the right apps, or you can use or you can have the right security consultants, or you can have an alarm system, or you can use the right code words, or whatever it is. No one of those things is necessarily going to keep you safe in a world of both digital surveillance and physical threat. But if you stack those defenses, then you can really minimize the threats. And what we're arguing for is not a world where there are no threats in your political work, but a world where there are just fewer, to the point where you can just do your job. You can just do the thing that you want to do, and you can be a little bit less distracted and concerned and anxious and worried that something's going to get you because you've done the investing that needs to happen in your personal security. So we don't poo-poo that stuff. We take it really seriously, and we try to give folks the resources in their regular person lives to do something about it.
Yeah. So you studied these movements around the world. I think there's something different here, because American history is a little different. I mean, there was no experience of political freedom in Russia, not ever.
Right.
Barely any in Hong Kong, and you mentioned earlier, like the propaganda that we're getting all the time from the right wing at the very beginning. I think it is not meant to make you believe the president's not a crook. Americans think he's a crook. It's not meant to make you believe that we're winning a war in Iran, that Americans think we're losing. It's not meant to make you think prices are going down when they're going up. It's meant to make you forget yourself, forget who we are, forget the history of freedom in America and the advocacy, the agency that we all have. Because if we're either scared, or we're busy being outraged, or we're told to hate each other, the Gaza balloon goes up every 4 minutes, and then the trans balloon goes up every other minute. It's all meant to make people walk away from each other and be afraid. If we remember our history, if we remember ourselves, if we ignore the sign outside the Smithsonian that says the story of overcoming obstacles is a lie, if we ignore that sign when we go in and actually learn that, like Black Americans overcame like unbelievable, horrible stuff and taught us all what the Declaration means, we have a better chance of getting through this.
authoritarianism is about stealing your money and your rights. And part of
I think your memory too.
well, and I think that part of what makes it's definitely about claiming memory. Jason Stanley's book on fascism and the fight over memory. I can't remember exactly the name of the book. Right, fantastic book on this.
Yep.
And I would even just say, as an aside, there was a reason why I think it was actually on July 4th, this White House's Domestic Policy Council put out a report on July 4th, on the 250th anniversary, on the U.S. History Museum, on the Smithsonian U.S. History, National U.S. History Museum, about how they're so woke and how they're trying to claim history, and they're telling all these stories, and they're elevating race and talking about race as divisive, and this is very there's extraordinary parallels with other authoritarian regimes in that regard. But the reason I just said, so of course you're right, but the reason I bring up those other two is because the most efficient way to get you to cede your freedom is to point to the other people in society who the government says are taking those freedoms for you. Don't blame us, it's the trans people. Don't blame us, it's the students. Don't blame us, it's the DEI hires or whoever it is. And so as a result, I think our thesis in this book is that fighting authoritarianism is basically, if I were to do it on one foot, it's expanding your definition of who you mean by we. At precisely the moment when the government is asking you or compelling you to shrink your definition of who we mean by we.
Very smart.
And I would just say, this is not a perfect country. We've had deep racial traumas and original sin of slavery, which we've never addressed. And there's a reason why these things keep flaring up. These themes keep flaring up. But I do think that we have moments and movements in American history where we have a little bit at a time done that work of expanding who we mean by we. We've done that certainly over time, gradually and way too slowly, expanding who has the right to vote, who can own property, and in a more spiritual sense, like who is. I think about the 90s when I was very young, but there was a lot, the 90s was all about multiculturalism and hyphenates, right? And I think there's always a backlash, as we're seeing right now. Carol Anderson's book, Carol Anderson is an amazing scholar of history at Emory, who's my professor at Emory, actually.
Oh, fabulous.
And she has an amazing book called White Rage, which sort of chronicles what I'm talking about here, all these backlashes.
It's a great book.
It's a great book. And on the other side of this, there is a constant drumbeat of people who are doing the work of trying to do that expanding, and we're always going to have to keep pushing. There's nothing. I don't believe that necessarily there's an arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. We always have to keep pushing in every generation.
Yes, but we will keep pushing.
Of course.
So it's so interesting to hear, and I do this too. We have expanded who the we is in the country. We say that. You say that, and I say that. In reality, I know this as a parent. I have 3 kids. Right? Mm-hmm. My 2 eldest kids were inseparable, young. And the 3rd one came around and she just pushed her way in. And then they were all 3 inseparable. But when I think about the we that is my 3 kids, right? The 2 of the oldest didn't make we bigger. The younger one pushed her way in, and the other ones can't imagine a world without her.
Yeah.
Right? And I think about the battles in America, the civil rights battle here. White America didn't say, "Oh, you know what? We were wrong. We really think we should have everybody be equal." It was 100 years or more, but 100 years from the end of slavery, of a conscious, hardworking effort to say, "Sorry, guys, we're here." And you know what? Afterwards, The rest of us are like, duh, of course you're here. Like, come on in, right? So this
That's
fight
great.
to
I love
expand the
that.
we is always the guy who isn't here, and that's what makes American history unique, because we showed up like every other country that's ever broken from a colony, right? Broken from its master as a colony, and said we believe in freedom. But when we said it, it was patently untrue. And there were huge
Yeah,
groups here who then
yeah,
had to say, okay,
yeah.
boys, if you mean it, you're going to have to find ways for us. And that is unique to us. And that's, I think, what, if we remember that, we're going to kick their ass.
I love when people, you hear people who are talking about student protesters now and how if only they could learn from the way the civil rights, Martin Luther King did it the right way. How come they can't do it like Martin Luther King? Martin Luther King was one of the most unpopular people, at his time. He was
Yes.
pushing,
So was Muhammad Ali, a hero.
Of course.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe the one thing I would bring it back to the book for a second, which is to say there is an idea in that we talk a bunch about in the book, which is an idea from another scholar named Maria Stephan, who says that the lifeblood of civil resistance movements is something that she calls collective stubbornness. And one of the reasons that we wrote this book is that authoritarianism just looks different than it used to, right? It doesn't come into town on the back of a coup anymore. It happens through elections, the slow hollowing out of democratic institutions. So when democratic institutions are working less well, when the tools that we've generally used for these kinds of things, like elections, we still have elections, but they're skewed, or they're less free and less fair. We still have courts, but they're stacked. We still have a media, but it begins to be more tilted. You have to look to other tools. That's not to say that we shouldn't keep using those
No, we
normative
have to
tools.
improve
We have
them.
to keep using
Yeah.
them. We have to improve them. We have to shore them up, and we have to insist on them, actually, and keep winning in them. But we also need this other set of skills. And it's the thing that you're talking about, which is collective stubbornness, which is gumming up the works, civil resistance, strike, boycott. These are things that the professional class that I come from, for example, is not used to. We are not schooled in these tactics. There's a respectability. Let's just do things the right way. And the truth is that once you hit, and we learn this from communities of color, from civil rights groups, from women
From
who got
labor
the vote,
history,
from
from
labor
women's. I mean,
history,
it just turns out to be all over
everyone.
American history, wherever you
Everyone.
look. Right. We just got
Exactly.
the last few, like 50 years, 30 years, we outsourced that work to lawyers. And now we're like, yeah, no, it didn't work. We got
Some of us outsourced it to lawyers, but other, domestic workers didn't, right? Like lots of
That's
people
right.
have continued having to, and all kinds of parts of the labor economy
Yep.
have had to continue doing this. I think that Muslim and Arab Americans after 9/11 are also a more recent example. And so there is, I think, it's a great point that we really do need to look to history, because we don't just have to. Somebody asked us this in San Francisco at an event we did the other day, like, how come you're spending all this time talking about the rest of the world? We have a history here to look to, and that's absolutely right. And I think
Yeah,
very
we can
helpful
learn
to
from
us.
the world, though. I mean, that,
Both.
one of the
Both.
lessons of our history is we can learn from the
Yes,
world.
that's true. That's true. Absolutely right.
All right, just tell everybody where they can get this wonderful book.
So the book, yeah,
Oops,
on
I can't
on
see the book
courage.
on the screen.
That's okay. Yeah, the book On Courage: How to Be a Dissident in the Age of Fear. You can get it really anywhere that books are sold. You can get it, I mean, really anywhere that books are sold. You can call your local. It's at a lot of local bookstores, at Barnes and Noble, at Bookshop, and then all the other places that we don't say out loud. You can also get them there.
It's by the way, there's a lot of as you heard in this conversation, talking about scholarship. It's not a scholarly book. It is a great read that is not for the scholars. It's for everyone who's in this fight.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
You bet. All right. Well, thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. See you soon.
All right, everybody. Your calls when we come back.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Well, I normally, it's been Jim every single time, but Dave got here first. So Dave, kick us off, and then we'll go to Jim.
Hey, Edwin. Yeah, that paper up north last week, I was reading an interesting one that said War or Peace. It was about our presidents lately. And it was from Matt Taibbi, recently wrote it, and kind of deserves debate. He said that he said, we're doomed and our leaders are insane. He said, not one of our presidents, Taibbi writes, can resist starting wars. When the Soviet Union fell, President Bill Clinton said the Cold War is over. We must secure the peace. A few years later, he and NATO launched airstrikes against Serbian forces. Clinton got the U.S. involved in conflicts in Somalia, Haiti, Bosnia, and Kosovo. And President George W. Bush was elected after, saying, I don't think our troops ought to be used what's calling nation building. I don't want to be the world's policeman. Then Bush became history's all-time booster for world policing, writes Taibbi, sending American soldiers to Afghanistan and Iraq. He did that despite his defense secretary giving him a memo listing 29 ways their plan could fail. Iraq could fracture, ethnic conflict could spread, other countries might exploit the chaos, the U.S. might have difficulty finding weapons of mass destruction. It would be hard to govern Iraq after Saddam Hussein was removed. Many of the warnings came true. Thousands of Americans died. Did our politicians see the error of the ways? No. Hillary Clinton ran for president, promising to send more soldiers to Afghanistan. Barack Obama promised real change. He criticized Bush's war policies, pointed out that was a constitutional lawyer, and promised to close the Guantanamo Bay prison. While campaigning, he said, I will give our military a new mission on my first day in office, ending this war. Voters liked that. Obama won. Just 8 months later, he won a Nobel Peace Prize for what the Nobel judges called extraordinary efforts to strengthen international diplomacy and cooperation between people. Obama did withdraw most American soldiers from Iraq, but then he sent an additional 30,000 American soldiers to Afghanistan, expanded drone assassinations in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia, and launched missiles at Libya. Guantanamo remained open. At one point, Obama reportedly even told staffers, turns out I'm really good at killing people. Then Donald Trump was elected. From the moment he came down that escalator, writes Taibbi, he was different. During his first term, he stated, our goal is peace. He stuck to that. He started no wars during his first term. Then President Joe Biden was elected, saying time to end the war. Biden did withdraw U.S. forces from Afghanistan, but so clumsily that hundreds of innocent people were killed. He then sent supplies and advanced weapons to Ukraine, declaring that the U.S. will stand with Ukraine in its war with Russia. When Trump ran again, he repeatedly said, we will have no more wars, but look at what's happened since. Trump in his second term is no longer an affront to the system, writes Taibbi. He is the system. We're an empire, about to pour our vanishing treasure into a $1.5 trillion defense budget that's got eyes on Venezuela, Iran, Cuba, Greenland, Colombia. And let's see. I don't know if he's right. I focus on economics. I know little about diplomacy and foreign affairs. I don't understand why presidents who promise peace keep taking us into war. One reason is that Congress lets them. In Washington, starting a war is easy, ending one is a nightmare. Since the president is only blasted for chaos that results from pulling troops out, why even try? It's safer to avoid terrible headlines and just let the wars grind on. One thing I do know after many years covering politicians is that their grand plans rarely achieve their stated goals. Since World War II, America's launched military interventions in Korea, Vietnam, Greece, Cuba, Cambodia, Lebanon, Libya, Iraq, Somalia, Haiti, Bosnia, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, Iran. Our intentions were good, but often the results were not. President George Washington, in his farewell address, said, why quit our own to stand upon foreign ground? That's good advice, now largely ignored. So anyway, some food for thought there anyway.
Yeah, very good food for thought. I mean, I believe that the Romans were right when they said, if you want peace, prepare for war. But they were in our case, it has tempted leaders to start war as opposed to prepare for peace. We see this all over the world today. We are deeply in want of peacemakers.
Yeah, and
everybody's looking for their edge.
The missiles and everything, we're down about 67% already on this stuff.
This is one of the biggest disasters ever to happen to the United States. And we will not recover our place in the world, and the world will be more dangerous because of it. Anyway, Dave, thank you
Thanks,
so
Edwin.
much.
Thanks for giving me
Appreciate
the
it.
time. Bye-bye.
You bet. All right, Jim.
Hi, Edwin. If you allow me to get a little philosophical on August 1st, I'm thinking of faith, hope, and charity. The greatest of these is charity. Now, that isn't just material charity that people would jump to that conclusion. It's in a short sprint of existence. It is our duty to listen to the other person in the same boat, the exact same boat that we're in, and try to figure out what you could possibly do to help them, give them some direction or whatever the case may be. And it's sorely lacking. When I hear these influencers, I always ask, somebody will say, well, the influence. I go, do they ever talk about charity? They talk about our need to poise charity toward each other. And it's exactly, Lauren, this government that we have now, I mean, look what they're doing to immigrants. My God, they're putting them in prisons. They're killing them. Two people, there were a couple that were sent back to one of the South American countries and were murdered. They had 3 beautiful little children. They're orphans, these kids in America. Where is the chair? And a politician, my God, that's the first thing I look for. I look for somebody who has, as the Greeks say, compassion, meaning to suffer along with. That's what I'm looking for in a leader. I don't know about you, Evan, but this is a mess. This is an absolute mess. Do you see any compassion out of these ICE people or just anywhere? It's just in the vernacular, just in conversation seems to be lacking. When I was a kid, we grew up, Albert Schweitzer, Tom Dewey, doctors, altruistic doctors that gave up their, to help people. Those were our heroes. They weren't Musk.
Jim, what you're talking about, and again, it's one of the things that they are desperate to make us forget. And that is that we are a fundamentally decent people. I mean, you're coming on this show and you are talking St. Augustine right now about what we owe each other, of what portion we've been given, what we owe each other.
Funny. But Edwin, you started the show with this, and you're absolutely right, because that's at our core. That was America to me. That is America to me.
Yeah, and they want you to forget it. They absolutely want you to forget it and think that's not normal. What's normal is take what you can and run over whom you must. And that is not who we are. If we remember that.
That's the way you started the show, and have a good week, too. Thank you, Evan.
You too. Thank you, Jim. All right. I have another Dave.
Yes, good afternoon there, Edwin. This is my first time calling to your show.
Well, thank you, Dave.
And what the other Dave was saying about compassion, the Trump administration, their idea is take what you can and run over people. That's what Donald Trump wants to do.
That's correct.
I fear that we won't come out of this, even in the midterms. My greatest fear is that the Republicans will not allow the swearing in of any Democrat or Democrats who won the election. That's my one fear. My other fear is that in 2028, Trump is going to go in his nice little bunker or big bunker or whatever size it is. He's got a bunker there in the White House now. And he's going to go in that bunker and he's not going to leave. He's going to refuse to come out. He's going to refuse to leave the White House because he knows if he loses, he may go to jail. He may very well go to jail, even if he had already declared immunity. I don't know. What do you and everybody else think about that?
Well, so let's talk about both of those. Will Mike Johnson refuse to seat people who've won in elections across the country? And if the election is a 3-vote margin, they may say he might be tempted to do it. But if it is a big win, they won't even try, as we saw in Hungary. If we really turn out, he won't have that option. But
You really think so?
but Dave, hang on. If he tries it, if he says the duly elected people will not be sworn in, I guarantee you 1 million Americans will sit down around the Congress and not let anybody out until they seat them. 1 million Americans, more.
I hope.
You know,
I really hope
we
that's
will do
true.
this. We will not let them steal our votes. I mean, that crowd that showed up on January 6th, those violent thugs, we will be there in 50 times those numbers and without any weapons. But we will say to them, we're not going home until you do your job. And they will do it. I'm not worried about that. I'm not saying they won't try, but Americans won't let them get away with it. And on the other, if Donald Trump barricades himself in the White House, you know what? The White House is a building. Our democracy is bigger than a building. If he wants to barricade himself in the White House, I'm like, okay, fine, cut the power and put a fence around it and call it his jail and be done with him and let him say, you know what? You saved us the trouble of trying you in court. This is where you're staying for the rest of your days. We're going to run the government from the OEOB or something. You're done. You're like,
Oh,
right?
wow, cutting the power. Wow, that would be something else, wouldn't it?
I mean, like, if he loses it, when he's done, he's gone. And if he doesn't want to be gone, well, you know what? That building is not our democracy. It's important, but he's already torn a chunk of it down. We are bigger than that, and we cannot forget it. He doesn't get to turn everything into a monument to himself. No, 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 no.
I really hope not.
All right. Thank you for calling. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. All right, Paul, you're next.
Yeah, gosh, Edwin, I'm listening to, I get to the point where I don't even know what to say about it anymore. I was thinking of Jim, Augustine, Albert Schweitzer, we're talking in our own bubble now. I mean, these people in this regime never heard of those people.
Well, but his point was, you don't have to remember who Albert Schweitzer was, but his point was, decency used to be at a value in America. And I actually think it still is. It's just not on display by these guys.
Well, yeah, because there was a Republican Party not all that long ago, and some of these people are still alive, where they could, David Brooks with you and Albert Schweitzer, and actually supports his point of view. Because with people like that, our points of view were not that. I still believed in a democratic America, a democracy. I don't think, I mean, I don't.
Hey, Paul, you're cutting in and out. Your sound isn't very good today.
Yeah,
I'm losing you.
Yeah, well, that's the corporation that I have to go through for my phone. I can't hold the phone either. It's like, it's ridiculous. I don't know if it's true or not, but
well, now I think you've lost you completely. Try calling back in, because I've lost you completely. In the meantime, let's go to Roosevelt.
Double E, thank you for taking my call, my friend.
My pleasure. How are you today?
How are you doing? I'm doing fantastic. Hey, listen,
That's what I like to hear.
understand that Perot dropped the charges on David Hearn as far as this pool thing. So
I'm glad you brought that up. I am so glad you brought that up. Just so everybody knows what he's talking about, this is the Olympic athlete that Janine Pirro said she had the evidence that he took a knife and carved a gash into the reflecting pool, and then Doug Burgum, the Interior Secretary, went on dozens of TV shows and said, these criminals, this man, we have the evidence, he's destroyed the reflecting pool. And Donald Trump from the White House said, we have the evidence, these terrible people are damaging these monuments in America. And you know what? They're dropping the case. They're dropping the case because all that they talked about, they were lies. And they got to court and under oath, they were said, where's the evidence? And they said, oh, what do you mean you need evidence to convict somebody in the United States? And the nice judge says, yeah, you still need evidence to do that. And they said, oh, well, then we're dropping the case. Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, well, on the same subject, what is this about the golden horse? I just found out about this a couple of days ago or a day ago. I don't remember. They got that out already in Washington? I mean, all this stuff we're paying for, isn't that like a, 24-karat gold leaf horse? I mean, this guy is making Washington look like, King Tut's tomb. I mean, everything is ridiculous, and we're paying for all this stuff, including the ridiculous cases, frivolous cases that he's got against David Hearn, that he had against David Hearn, and all this stuff we pay for, if I'm not mistaken, Double E. I mean, what other plans does he have? And switching the subject, did you see where our speaker said that they have plans for next year if they get the House back of dipping into Social Security? Did you see that? I don't know where I heard that, but he was caught on a hot mic or something. It wasn't a video. It was a mic where
I put nothing past them. Every day they're in power, America gets weaker. America gets less free. America becomes less respected around the world. America gets less prosperous. Every day they're in power, they take from us and line their own pockets. There is not one. We are not safe with these people in power. But we're not also, we're also law abiding, and we're going to kick them out through elections. But yeah, we aren't safe. They're terrible people doing terrible things. Yes, they're gold plated. I mean, have you seen the pictures of the Oval Office?
Yeah,
it's the ugliest place in America. It's the ugliest room in America. Now.
It's right out of SNL. No.
Yeah.
And then to round up my three subjects that I wanted to talk about, the way that they treated Dr. Fauci. I mean, who's going to want to work for the government like that? Who's going to want to be in science and have a future and working and aiding and helping us as far as all this stuff that these guys cut, especially Doge? And speaking of that, the cuts that they made with this explosive, not a joke, diarrhea thing that Bobby's not. Now we're included, I believe. We're one of 42, 45 states.
Yep.
Where they have cases.
Yep. But so I think people, young people that I talk to, young lawyers, young scientists, they love this country, Roosevelt, and they are so eager to be part of the next administration. They were going to go into government despite these terrible people because they want to rebuild what these terrible people have torn down. They are determined to move us forward on the ashes of the disaster of the Trump regime. So I'm not worried that good people won't go into government. I think good people are looking at this and going, we are waiting for the chance to come to the rescue. They can be damned if they're coming after me the same way. I mean, Fauci did his job, and it was a terrible time, right? And nobody could handle a pandemic perfectly. He had to handle a pandemic and President Trump at the same time. I think it's remarkable what he did, but they went after him because why? Why? Because we're losing a war in Iran, because public health is in jeopardy all over the country with measles and cyclospora, because he's got his hand in the cookie jar. So why not? Let's find a guy who's, who's retired, who's 85, and whose best work was, 10 years ago or 8 years ago when he was doing this for us, and make that the cause of the day. It's ridiculous, subject-changing nonsense. Again, and theme of the show today, to make us forget who we are, right? They make us want to forget who we are. And I'm not going to forget who we are. Yeah.
And Double E, to your point, this is the same old tired plan from 10 years ago, where a few years ago, not 10 years ago, where he claimed that they stole his election. It's the same plan, diversion, the same thing, bringing the oldies and goodies for him as far as who to blame. Bottom line, it was his decision to do what he did with Fauci. He played him like a yo-yo because he never supported what Fauci did. You know what, as far as wearing a mask, as far as the vaccines. And when Biden got in there, he implemented the Fauci's ideas the right way. But Trump, there was always putting the blame on Fauci for even back then. If you remember, when he had that press conference where he suggested that we should drink bleach and fluorescent bulbs and all that stuff, who was alongside of him? Barbara, wasn't that Barbara Burke? I can't remember her last name.
Yeah. Yes, I think it was Deborah Burks, but I don't remember for sure.
Deborah Burks, yeah. But it's the same tired plan, bringing the past and putting the blame on somebody else. And it's like you said, it's a diversion. It's a way of changing the subject. I'll tell you one thing. He is in hot water with this Iran thing. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Not that he ever did, but he thought he was in Venezuela again. That's my assessment.
Yeah, well, and the problem with that is, you know what? I mean, I'm not rooting for Iran. And the problem with that is that his incalculable errors, his arrogance, his stupidity. Pete Hegseth, who thinks testosterone is a military strategy, I mean, they are getting their ass kicked, and that ass that's getting kicked is the United States, and we are going to we are going to have a strategic defeat. We're not going to be defeated on the battlefield. That's not going to happen. We weren't defeated on the battlefield in Vietnam. But we will have a strategic defeat, and it will make the world much worse off. And that is entirely his fault. He's entirely to blame. I know people want to say, oh, well, Bibi Netanyahu got him in that war. Seriously, the United States is responsible for the biggest, most powerful country in the world. When we decide to go to war, it's not because some small country said, oh, gee whiz, we think you should go to war. This is on us and on the President of the United States, on him alone and his team of idiots. So Americans are dead. They're lying to us about the casualties. They're lying to us about the cost. They're lying to us about the drawdown of Patriot missiles that protect us. They have canceled and fired everybody who's involved in military intelligence. So now we have Iranians cyber attacking water supplies in 7 states in the United States. And the administration, this terrible man who's president of the United States, wants to blame Minnesota instead of Iran that's doing the attack because he's more afraid of Minnesota than he is of what Iran might do to us. This man is not your president. He's not my president. He sits in that Oval Office where he got elected, but he's decided he's not doing the job of a president. Not for 1 second is he going to do that job. Instead, he's going to sit there and say, what are the tools I have now that I'm here to enrich myself, and who cares about everybody else? And the idea that he hasn't been thrown out by Congress for his crimes and misdemeanors, it says we have to throw out this Congress. It's just disgraceful, Roosevelt. Look, at the end of the show, you got me going.
And on these elections coming up, you're going to start hearing 3 words more often: socialist, communist, Mondani. That's what you're going to hear. That's the way.
Well, I think I hope so. I hope so. That doesn't bother me. What worries me is what we're going to hear from the President of the United States 2 days before an election is, oh my God, there is a threat. You cannot go out of your house. The Iranians are going to rain nuclear something on us or some kind of terrorist threat. So you're only safe if you stay in your house. Don't go out to vote because you're not safe. We're going to hear that because we can't. And you know what? Maybe it's true. But we won't be able to believe him because he's lost all credibility. All credibility.
And you gave a perfect example with the Minnesota thing. That was ridiculous. But it's just, they're going to try everything. Let's just put it that way. They're going to try everything to put the fear in the voters. And I hope they don't do this martial law thing that they might have planned.
They have everything planned, and we are going to fight back. We are going to fight. Thank you. All right, everybody, it's another week. We are into August. This is like the last chance you have to walk in the sunshine this month, because starting in September, it is nonstop campaign work every minute of every day. We'll talk about that starting then. But right now, let's just get our ideas, our head clear, and take the time, please, to remember who you are, to remember who we are, to remember what we have accomplished together in our history, to remember that we are a great democracy, to remember that we are decent people. And that still matters, no matter what they say. And with that, have a great week, and I will talk to you next week. Take care.